Hello.
Yes, hello, audience. Service of chocolate, service of cheese.
I have nothing but back pain.
You are briefed. Well, you were hunting yesterday, so it can't be helped.
Hello, welcome back to the one. My name is Beast, so today we're back with Grisaia. I've had nosebleeds yesterday and today.
Were you thinking of Chizuku?
No, I am extremely prone to nosebleeds in the winter. That's just the thing. What annoys
Because
me?
the dry air, I see.
Yeah, what annoys me is that yesterday I was supposed to come in 15 minutes early for work because I worked 15 minutes less the Saturday before due to running out of work. So we just said, okay, instead of sitting around for 15 minutes now, I'll just come early next time. And I was going to go, so I arrived 20 minutes early even because my grandmother also wanted some groceries for me to buy to her, by which I mean it's literally just one packet for her to make sauerbraten with. It's a type of post roast, don't worry about it. And just as I was getting ready, the nosebleed started, and suddenly I just barely made it in time for my normal shift start.
Oh.
That was an almost 30-minute nosebleed.
Yeah, that's not good.
I'm used to it though. I shouldn't. Like there were multiple
It's a
cases back
miserable
when I
thing
was.
to get used to.
That was back when I was still in school. There were so many times where in class I would just like, oh, nosebleed, and I would just silently get up and walk to the fucking toilet to, let it finish bleeding. Like every time a new we got a new teacher that didn't know about this, the teacher would like panic a little bit. Like, do you need someone to come with you? Nah, don't. Like new classmates, fucking panic. I just can you like just calm down? This is normal.
It's like a veteran soldier telling the young ones not to get upset at the artillery barrage. They probably won't hit us.
Don't worry, the mortars have the accuracy of stormtroopers.
They probably won't hit us, and if they do, you probably won't feel it.
Anyways, we are now lavishing the fact that he is angry. But first, before we really start, there's something to do.
More of that, huh? Just can't help himself.
Oh yeah. Anyways.
He's like an animal.
Oh yeah, my cat, for some reason, while I was today on the toilet because of my nosebleed, it just fucking waited in front of the toilet and started meowing. I opened the door, just walked in, just snuffed around, just left again.
Cats are weird, man.
Yeah.
When I'm in there using the bathroom, they'll stick their paws under the bathroom door and meow.
Our doors aren't elevated like that to where they can do that, but
ours are.
There are times where, like, I have had times where in the middle of the night I wake up and go to the toilet, and the cat follows me into the toilet. I just am too lazy to like throw it out, so I just close the door, lock it, do my business while the cat just like lingers around the bathroom. Maybe comes up for head pets.
Cats are weird. They just want to be involved.
Yeah. Anyways.
おっしゃった通りのことを実行しているまでですが。
とてもそうは思えないのだがね。私は由美子の気持ちを変えるために自作自演を行って身の危険を演出することにした。
認識しております。
ところがどうだ。実際はあなたの飼い犬が危機を演出するどころか、うまい具合に失敗しなければいけないボディーガードを完璧に実行している。そんなことでは由美子の気持ちは実家にではなく、その飼い犬の方に向くのは明白ではないか。
作戦は徹底しております。ですが、私どもは探偵や役者ではありませんので、 そんな細かいところまで空気を読んで行動すること等は不可能です。
Kooky.
スパ
Kooky
イ活
core.
動も平然と行うような赤坂絡みの犬がそんなことを言ったところで信憑性のかけらもない。ともかくもはや君たちを信頼することはできん。その風見雄二とかいう犬をすぐに作戦の前線から排除し、今後は一切関わらないように通達したまえ。
承知いたしました。
What was that?
言った通りよ。聞こえたでしょ？
Return call from JB. I've been waiting for has finally arrived, but instead of the information I wanted, she's brought me a whole new world of
聞
trouble.
こえなかったのならもう一度言うわ。風見雄二、
Oh,
機関の榊由美子護衛の任を解き、
dear God,
今
this
後
is
は
going all
一切
over
本
the
作
place.
戦に関わらぬよう通達する。
I think the Matrix is breaking down.
It just went everywhere. Did you see that? Oh, once human.
Okay, I'm actually going to put myself to offline if that's going to continue happening.
Don't. It's funny as shit.
It's funny
it's
if
a
it's like
classic.
every once in a while, but this has happened multiple times over the last 6 minutes. That's a bit
No,
too
it's a
much.
classic.
今
It's a
度こそ聞こえた？
Yeah.
Nothing beats Barry B. Benson opening up
I
fucking
don't have the
wallpaper
slightest clue
engine.
what's going on here. First they dumped the job of guarding my classmate on me without even providing half the details. Now they canceled it just as abruptly, ordering me to stay out of the matter entirely. You're not gonna tell me the reason?
本作戦においてはその通りよ。
JB?
ダメ。今回ばかりはどう甘えても教えられないの。いろいろな事情が重なっててね。ユージにもわかるでしょ？なんだか気な臭い話だってことぐらいは。
Do those circumstances have something to do with the bizarre behavior of the people attacking Skaki for the last week?
答えられないんだってば。
No matter how you look at it, their attack plan is just absurd. They're unbelievably sloppy and they don't learn from their mistakes, almost as if they're handicapping themselves. It's completely unnatural in every aspect,
あの
in
ね、
every respect.
ユージ。
Also, you just told me not to involve myself with this operation going forward. Seems a little overblown to refer to me as guarding Skaki as an op, wouldn't you say? Come on, JB.
私からは何も言えないわ。ただ、本作戦に関わるなというのは正当な命令よ。
I see. So there really is some worthy of being called an operation going on
切
here.
るわよ。
Thanks, JB. Love you.
こんなタイミングで言われても嬉しくないわよ。
Aw.
With his grumpy farewell, she abruptly hangs up on me. After gazing at the cell phone as it emits a droning dial tone for a moment, I snap the device shut and slide it back to my breast pocket. There's no doubt that someone's arranging these threatening movements in Kaki's vicinity. I'm fairly confident that it's not a simple matter of some group of criminals looking to carry her off for some financial objective. There's clearly some much more complicated. At the current stage, all I've got to work on are the scraps of information JB gave me. Worse, I was just pulled off the job itself. Orders from the main office are absolute. I'm no longer Skaki's bodyguard. It's a fact. And there is nothing I can do about it. However, the girl's clearly in some form of danger. I'm not willing to overlook that, no matter what my employer expects of me. Skaki's not a stranger to me anymore. Not to say that I've developed feelings of the sort that would entertain our voyeuristic dorm mates. She's a classmate of someone I've spent a lot of time with lately. That's all. But it's very
In denial.
don't intend to just abandon the girl when she needs my help. Anyways, an operation, huh? She's clearly under professional obligation not to divulge the details. In making that so clear, however, she gave me crucial grounds for speculation. Most likely the decision to remove me was made over JB's opposition. But she couldn't provide any information about that either. In other words, people she can't discuss with me are involved in the planning. Strange behavior of these assailants, dismissal, this mysterious operation. The major clue I have suggests is going to become a huge pain in the ass. For the time being, I guess I'll report to Skaki. And I give Skaki the rough outline of the situation, her face filled with a surprisingly clear expression of dismay. It was just decided today. They gave me official notice by phone, so I'm already off the job. sorry about following around all this time. It was my job, so I didn't have any choice. Think you can forgive me?
別に許すだなんて
Yeah, she was
Scott
just starting to
Stoner.
like it.
Skaki's tone of voice suggests she couldn't care less about that particular detail at the moment. I'm sure you're aware, Skaki, but just because I've been pulled from this assignment doesn't mean the threat has passed. From now on, you need to be keeping a watchful eye on your surroundings whenever you go out. Constantly monitor everything that's going on within a 30-meter radius for signs of danger. Also, I've been removed from my position as a bodyguard, but they didn't restrict me from lecturing or to prepare for future threats. Not that they would need to be approved if I asked for permission, of course. That's part of the reason I didn't press JB too hard for specific details. So that's the basic outline, but Skaki. That's not good. You really need to listen to me this time, alright? After all, next time something happens, you're gonna be the one protecting yourself.
そうよね
Basically repeat my self-defense lecture from the top. Not sure if the girl's actually listening this time, but she certainly got a serious expression on her face. Seems to be thinking something over very intently. That's all I have to say. Finished my explanation. Deciding to wrap this up for the moment, I look straight into Skaki's eyes and continue. From now on, I'll be back to just classmates. Skaki doesn't offer a clear reaction, far from typical. Deciding not to stretch this out, I turned my back on her and began to walk towards my room. At a bare minimum, I've told her what to watch out for. She'll probably be on guard for a while, and I'm planning to keep an eye on her from a greater distance than before, providing coincidental help when necessary. In some respects, this should actually make it easier for me to take action compared to when I was specifically acting as a close protection bodyguard. I don't know if JB read this far ahead when she dropped those hints over the phone, but for some reason, for the moment, I think I've reached a respectable compromise solution that doesn't violate the letters of my orders. But my satisfaction proves short-lived. Just as I'm taking my second step, she calls out to me from behind. When I turn back, Skak is still facing me. She stands with her legs spread wide, her head hanging slightly. Not far enough to hide the intense anguish expression on her face. Both of her hands are clenched tightly into trembling fists. 10 uncertain seconds of silence pass before she finally opens her mouth to continue.
風見くんあなた私を守ってくれてたのは仕事だからそう言ってたわよ
Yeah, that I did.
そう分かったわそれじゃ
She swallows softly and looks me in the eye.
私あなたを雇うわ護衛として
And just like that, Skaki Yumiko's fired right back with a complete surprise of her own. Say what?
聞こえなかったのかしらならばもう一度言うわ
Taking a page out of a certain shaggy-headed blonde's book, Skaki repeats herself, clearly enunciating every syllable.
あなたを私榊由美子の護衛として雇います
Oh, whatever we put her in a grateful for. Fucking stumbled over my own words there for a second. Oh, I'm losing it.
You're going senile and demented in your old age.
Yeah, I should just be admitted to a home now.
It was about the last thing I was expecting. Doesn't Skaki hate having me following her around all the time? To be sure, she's often up noticeably over the last week or so. When I was lightly wounded in the course of duty as her bodyguard, she even showed some honest concern on my behalf. It said the girl always had fundamental problems with the nature of my protection. I'd approached this on the assumption she disapproved of being guarded in the first place. Very serious.
私が冗談を言えるような人間ではないことぐらいあなたも分かっているでしょ
Under the circumstances, I couldn't help wondering. But anyway, I'm pretty damn expensive. You sure about that?
普段無駄遣いをしていないから貯金はあるのそうでなくてもどこかの誰かがそういうものには不自由しないようにしてくれているわ
Perhaps because it's not money she earned herself, Skaki's tone of voice takes on a hint of self-ridicule. At any rate, it seems perfectly clear that this is no joke. She really means it. Alright then, I'll accept that request.
そうありがとうでは早速これから以前のようによろしく頼むわね
Compared to a minute before, Skaki's expression seems to have regained a bit of vigor. You alright with me approaching this the same way as before?
ええ。それがどうかしたのかしら。
Well, I'd be fundamentally trying to be aware of your movements at all times, even when you're doing things generally regarded as shameful or embarrassing. Just wondering if that's really alright with you.
そういうところは配慮しなさい。
Seems like she really has gotten a bit of her spirit back.
とにかくこれまでと同じで同じように振る舞ってちょうだい。それだけよ。
Immediately after throwing these words in my direction, Skaki turns away and begins stomping loudly up the stairs. Probably headed to the rooftop again, I'd have guessed. Judging from the flow of conversation, I think it's best to give her a little time to herself. For the time being, I suppose we'll resume this afternoon. Half of a smirking female face pokes out from around the corner in a clearly deliberate way. Amane.
いや
Evil
ー、
genius.
さっきから一部始終を聞いててほんとどうなっちゃうんだろうって思ったけど、なんかいい方に転がってよかったわね。
Were you eavesdropping the whole time?
失礼ね、偶然よ。通りかかって耳に入ってきたから仕方なく聞いてただけだってばねえ、さっちゃん。
Eight,
はい、
eight dropping no
偶
eaves.
然です。それ以外に言いようがありません。
Even Sachi. Never was coincidence that they were passing by, but I think listening to the entire conversation may have had something to do with their personal curiosity. Well, with the way they kept striking up bizarre conversations about Skag the other day, I've got the distinct feeling these people are up to something. Especially Amane.
しかし、榊さんも意外と思い切ったことやっちゃう子なのね。お姉さんびっくりしちゃった。
Really shouldn't keep playing up your age like that. Even as a gag, you'll get wrinkles.
うっさいわ。で、私のことはともかくとして、なんかいいわね。個人的なボディーガードとかさ、ねえ。
エロい空気がプンプン漂ってるのよさ。
エロい。ユージエロい。細かいことはよくわかんないけど。
I realized one of you was listening in. Felt some doubts in this regard before, but could it be that these people have too much time on their hands? I've shared dorms with female colleagues before, but they used their off days studying intensely or throwing themselves into personal training just like everyone else. By comparison, I can't help thinking these girls suffer from a chronic lack of productive uses for their time. You people can think whatever you want, but the fact is Skag has got some very complicated personal circumstances that warrant protection. It's not something you should be laughing.
はいはい、わかってますよーだ。でもその全知全能のユージ様でもわかんない事情だってあるんですからね。
Say what? You're saying the intelligence I've gathered on Skaki is incomplete. That's highly interesting. The moment I speak those words, the four sets of eyes simultaneously narrow to reproachful slits overflowing with pure scorn.
Tense anime protagonist moment.
Oh.
They're the eyes of people who've just lost all respect for someone. Okay, what's with the look?
ユージには一生つかめない情報かもね。ひょっとしたら。風見さんにはこの部分においてはですが、本当に失望しています。いや、絶望と言っても過言ではありません。
まあ、お兄ちゃんは穴があって突っ込んでればそれで満足ってタイプだから仕方ねえんだけどな。チルチルもそう思うだろ。
そうよ。この人参。
Carrot?
いや、ほら、そういうのって人参とかって言うんじゃないの？みちる様、どうかお気を確かに。
こりゃとんでもないところから爆弾がいらっしゃったのよさ。
ちょっと待ってよ、今はユージの話してたんでしょ。なんで人参の話出した途端に私いじりになってんのよ。
Michiru, never stop blundering.
Oh, Pichu, my beloved.
I cannot hear the word ninjin seriously anymore. It is like this fucking old ass animation at this point. Like there was a fucking weird thing where a bunch of Hololivers did like a weird fucking host club roleplay fun stream where Piccolo was one of the hosts and the customers were... God, who were the customers? I think it was Matsuri and what's her name? Yuzu, the fucking nurse, like the school nurse, that girl. And where one was like, so can she put it in? Put what in? Carrot. With very heavy implications about the Pinor.
Carrot.
Hold on. Let me look it up real quick. Maybe I'll find it. It's not the Kobo one.
Probably Iris.
That was actually back when fucking Rushia was still around. Jesus.
Oh god. That's been forever,
she
man.
she was also part of the event. Hold on. I know it is this artist that did the animation, so I can just... Oh yeah, there we go. Pekora works in the host bar. Pekora's virginity hazard.
Oh, hang on. I think I might know this video. Is this the animation that's doing the rounds?
If you mean by AM Hollow, then yes.
I think I've seen this already. Yes! Yes, there was also another one, part 2 of this, done afterwards as well.
Nah, that's the one with Rushi, I think.
Yeah. It's such a good vid. So
Yeah.
good.
Also, immediately afterwards, this video has a recommended video that's just called the hardest challenge I've ever attempted in Total War Warhammer 3. And the thumbnail is just one of the fucking frog cavalry units from
Oh god. Is that additional stupidity?
a Brilliant Stupidity.
Yes, I love him.
It just
I love
says
those videos.
pain, the Nurgle frog is tearing up, and next to him is just a fucking speed count of 0.
Yeah, I love Brilliant Stupidity so much. Such a great guy.
I assume you also watch Reggie then?
Absolutely, I watch all of those YouTubers.
Makes sense. The most recent one that I Am Hollow animated is just Together Forever Lily, Shy Lily. Which were also funny. Alright, this one was funny. I'm gonna like open a bunch of these for later. Nah, Hollow Vengers wasn't really that funny. Gura kidnapped to the usual room. Yeah, sure, that's kind of funny. When a phoenix pooped on Gura, sure, that one was funny. Masochist janitor Calliope, yeah, sure. This one as well. Ina ate taco. Ina was Squidward. Gura doesn't wear pants. Cat Gura will pee on your bed. Those were all funny.
Which ended with violent tootling.
Anyways.
みちる様みちる様
バナナも人参もありだ。チルチルもなかなかチャレンジャーなのよさ。
Monkey.
Why are you
うる
like
せ
this?
えなもう
Monkey.
ユージどっか行っちゃった
Having successfully passed through the storm of frenzied meaningless excitement, I made my way back to the lobby alone. Sinking deeply into the sofa, I think back over my conversation with Skaki. Didn't see that one coming. Still having a hard time wrapping my head around it. I mean, for the first couple of days there, the girl was so furious about being guarded that she dusted off her treasured sword, the legendary box cutter of wrath. Or she just realized that she's in real danger here. When threatened by a mysterious menace, it's only natural to grow uncertain and fearful. At present, I suppose I'm the only means she has to relieve that anxiety even a little. From that perspective, I guess it's reasonable enough. Skog is basically a rational person. I can understand how she'd swallow her pride and make this choice after carefully weighing the alternatives. Whatever the case may be, I now have her approval. That should make it easy to continue protecting her, as I'd planned from the start. No need to look a gift horse in the mouth. She's hired me, I'll have to earn my salary. Pushing myself off the sofa, I glanced down at my watch. There's still plenty of time before Skaki will be heading out to draw her pictures. Guess I'll go run for a while. The threats are getting steadily stronger, and I'm not getting backup. This just means I'll have to intensify my training to match. After a light warm-up, I slap my hands together in the entrance, then push my way out of the front door at a jog. Today, as usual, our mysterious friends make their appearance. However, something's clearly different this time. From the moment they spot me, the men seem oddly flustered. I guess this is the CG we're using this time.
Well, for a short while
Temporarily,
anyway.
at least. Many of them appear to have cold feet. One or two take out cell phones and try to contact someone.
おい例のやつまだいるじゃないか
聞いてないぞ。護衛は外したと言っていただろう。
Wonder where they heard a thing like that. Got a feeling this might have something to do with JB's evasiveness earlier. Whatever the case, the men take much longer than usual to approach me.
構わねえとにかくやれやっちまえばいいんだ
They attack all at once now.
They actually do it properly
さ
and
あ
still
話が違
get
う
flattened
じゃ
out.
ねえかおい引くぞまともにやって叶うわけがねえ
When they finally managed to spur themselves to action, their strategy was as confused as always. Even more so, really, none of them seemed eager to take the lead. They're so sloppy that you'd think they were trying to fail.
もう言ったの
Skaki calls out timidly from behind me, slowly opening her eyes. Yeah, but something was definitely off this time. Skaki looks up at me with an expression of pure bewilderment. These constant attacks must be causing the girl more than enough worry, adding their unclear suspicious motives to the equation would probably only upset her further.
それは私があなたを雇ったことと何か関係はあるのかしら
Hard to say. It sounded like that might be the case, but there's no way to know if they were trying to mislead us. After brushing off a little dust, I'd indicate let's go with a slight movement of my head. As we slowly climb up the slope leading away from the riverbank, I think long and hard about our enemies. Just can't figure out their objective. It's always collected Skaki, but their attacks are far too sloppy for this to be a real kidnapping job. That phrase they used again, this isn't what we signed up for. Clearly knew I was taking on the job, which is a gesture connection to Ichigaya, my original client, in this matter. Just what is this? Still unsatisfied, I climb my way up to the road. Across from the setting sun, the world's already grown dark and murky. Something in the air suggests an approaching storm. I'll have to take countermeasures before the rain starts to fall in earnest.
So
He is angry. He may not show it, but you can feel it.
kind of reminds me almost of like Brock in Pokemon, but an evil version where his eyes are
Oh my
largely
god.
usually closed because he's hiding the hyper beam.
I love Brock. I love the old
Yeah.
Pokemon. That was a blast from the
They
past.
missed out. Because they really missed out because there are cases of like the gym leaders in the anime having like one Pokemon that they don't use in the gym that isn't the type they like example like they use, example being like Iris from Black and White having a fucking Excadrill. They should have given Brock a fucking Snorlax.
That would have been funny as shit.
Like especially like because like he's a cook, Snorlax eats a lot, would also fit.
Yeah. As it stands, Krogon wasn't a bad fit.
Yeah. Krogunk also was a far funnier alternative to Misty constantly pulling him away.
Yeah.
Because like sometimes Misty was just straight up like a bitch about it. Because sometimes he did have a chance. Like he did have an honest chance, but Misty just pulled him away anyways.
Yeah.
Like
Misty
when
was
he
not
gets
fair.
overbearing, sure, pull him away. But sometimes the girl was legitimately interested and Misty just pulled her away. And the girl was just like, oh, she must be his girlfriend. So she just drops it. Like, Rokon
Bit young to
has
be
the
his
fucking
girlfriend,
excuse that he is a tired fucking frog that is sick of his bullshit.
Yeah. Tired frog, sick of the bullshit. Yep.
Oh my god.
何か申し開きすることはあるかね。
私どもに後ろ暗い話など一切ございませんが。
とぼけるのもいい加減にしたまえ。あなた方に排除するよう申し付けた例の風見何がしとかいうチンピラ。しかも私の立てた計画においてもことごとく邪魔ばかりしている。これでもなお何もしていないというなどずうずうしいにも程があるだろう。
私は正式に風見雄二に対して護衛の任を解くよう伝えました。当組織の規律及び当人の性格から命令違反は考えられません。
ではこの状況を一体どう説明するというのだ。
推測ではありますが、風見雄二が由美子さんの護衛を解く際、本人にその旨を伝達したのではないかと思われます。その上で不安に思った由美子さんから個人的なものとして風見雄二に護衛をする旨の依頼があったのではないだろうかと。
仮にそのようなことがあったとしても断るのが当然だろう。
それは社長のおっしゃる当然です。私はその当然を先日お伺いした際に尋ねられなかったので、そのようにしなかっただけです。
そのようなお子様の論理が通るとでも思っているのか。
子供でも大人でも約束や命令は絶対だと私どもは考えます。
もういい。帰りたまえ。
はい、失礼します。
娘の件だが、市ヶ谷の連中が妙な動きをするようになった。
いかがいたしましょうか。
腕の立つ人間を揃えてくれ。多少荒っぽいことをしても構わん。
わかりました。妨害する者への排除について生死はと。
ああ、仮にそうなったとしても問題はない。存分にやれ。
Oh lord! Yuji's about to murder someone, I think.
Oh, somebody's about to try to murder him at least.
Well, I have no fear for his safety because he's the main character.
Yeah, he's got plot armor.
了解いたしました。少々お時間をいただくかと思います。
急いでくれ。準備が整うまでは襲撃も一旦休止しろ。
はい。ではそのように。
おとなしく従っていればいいものを。ユミコめ。
Also, they told her something too.
It's been several days since I came into Sakaki's employ. Strange enough, they've been largely peaceful. A confused encounter immediately after she hired me was the last time those people tried anything. It doesn't mean they've given up, of course. Most likely they've withdrawn for the moment to prepare a more decisive move. I can afford to be a little less vigilant, but I'm careful not to let my guard down entirely. Fuck gravity! Come to think of it, why are you always wearing the school uniform? We're on vacation, so normally you'd wear casual clothes every once in a while. I was just wondering if there was some reason you don't.
それはみだりに私服姿で辺りをうろうろするものではないわ。そういうのは素行の良くない子がすることでしょ。
I guess everyone else in our school is a juvenile delinquent in the making, eh?
他の子たちは知らないわ。
That's not
私は
completely
前の
accurate to
学園
say.
でそう教えられたからそうしているだけ。人にそれを押し付けるようなつもりもないわ。
There's a silly question for the both of you. Did you have school uniforms? I did.
No, no school uniforms.
I
You
wouldn't.
probably went to fucking school in
I
some
probably
Ivy
fucking
League.
hate school uniforms. I say, Skog has grown calm enough to humor me with pointless small talk of this sort. She seems much less tense after several days without violent interruption, probably because there's no need for constant wariness. The movement of her pencil appears to have grown smoother as well. All of a sudden, her hand stops moving. With a brief exhalation of breath, she glances over at me out of the corner of her eye. What's wrong? You notice something? Turning her face away at my words, Skaki curls her body forward over her sketchbook. Her voice is almost small enough to be lost in the wind, but I hear it clearly enough. What was that?
あなたがこうして護衛してくれるから安心して絵に集中することができるわ。いや、というよりもあなたがいるからというわけでもないのだけれど。
This is suspicious.
また何か
Well, I mean, a thank you like this from Skagi of all people. Don't tell me. Is that why nothing's been happening in the last few days?
Huh?
See, it all fits. Skagi's already been kidnapped. The person sitting in front of me is an imposter. Classic trick, but you just gave yourself away. What have you done with Skagi? We're not playing a talk, I'm
私はここにいるわよ。ボケるのもいい加減にしてちょうだい。
Skagi, is that you after all?
今の一言で気づくとか本当にバカにしてるのね。
What do you mean by that? I'm considering every possible scenarios. I can respond to minor abnormalities.
もういいわよ。お仕事お疲れ様ね。
What are you so angry about? Seemed to be in an unusually good mood for just a minute ago, but now she's in a full sulk mode.
Dear
For all
God,
the
this
lectures I
is
received from JB and the others regarding the treatment of women, it seems I still have a great deal of room for improvement when it comes to interacting with females in my own age group. Mans doesn't learn.
Nah, he's dull.
Sighing ruefully, I close my eyes for a moment. Honestly, if only the sky would give me a little advance warning, I wouldn't get struck by lightning at such random moments. Put the water against my forehead brings me back to reality. I raise my head and look up at the sky. Seriously? At some point it filled up with angry grey rain clouds. Notice it was looking a little overcast, but I hadn't expected such a sudden dramatic turn for the worse. What would I consider attributing the abrupt storm to Kaki's out of character remarks disturbing the balance of the universe? But I have the feeling she wouldn't appreciate the gag.
急いで帰らないと。
Skagi immediately begins to push her art supplies back into her tote bag. But the rain, indifferent to our concerns, rapidly intensifies.
このままだと帰る頃には濡れネズミになりそうね。
A slight archaic expression that reveals her for the avid reader she is. Skagi accurately forecasts an unfortunate future. Yes, there's nothing for it. Let's await this out over there, point at the bridge that stands comparatively nearby. Well, it's just part of the scenery up until now, but at the moment it's our best option for shelter from the rain. Yeah, come on, I think it best to run. Leading Skaki along the river, I hurry to the bridge as the rain grows steadily stronger. She follows closely behind, her back protectively clutched to her chest.
Now Yuji can legitimately be a troll under the bridge.
Having sprinted all out for 200 meters or so, Skaki is completely out of breath by the time we reach our shelter. Alright, get your breathing back to normal, then take a seat and rest for a while. The area under the bridge quickly falls into shadow. Even the faint light trickling through cracks in the storm clouds can't reach us through the heavy iron above. Fortunately, since we're more or less in the country, there isn't much junk littering junk littering the area compared to what you'd find in the city. Sometimes an empty bottle or can rolls by on the river, but that's about it. Skaki and I brush off a light layer of dirt from the bare concrete foundation of the bridge and settle ourselves down to wait out the storm. As the girl at my side tries her best to wipe the water from her hair with a handkerchief, I examine the state of affairs outside. Streaks of rain have only grown larger and more frequent. There's no sign of it stopping anytime soon. The sky slightly grey and cloudy only minutes ago with over a sea of uninterrupted black. In a country town like this, they don't even light the streets properly. The air has already grown dark as if to exacerbate our unease. Finally, there's that familiar roar, sound that's always seemed to accompany summer downpours. Thunder can be a frightening thing. I have colleagues with experience on mountain rescue options who would cower nervously every time a storm rolled by. Judging from the sound, it's relatively close. We'd best not move around too much at the moment. Guess we'll have to kill some time here, Skunky. Turning to my side to try to make eye contact. He doesn't meet my gaze. His throat moves, and hear a faint gulp. Come to think of it, still had an unexpectedly fearful side. Should probably be sure that he can't strike us here. Just him opening my mouth to speak. Ow. Never mind, this is the CG, I guess. Thumbnail name. Scott Yumiko doesn't let other people touch her. It's completely unthinkable that she touched him herself. When rain falls on her head, she brushes it off. When the wind blows on her face, she throws her way stubbornly through it. That's the person I thought she was. And that's why this doesn't quite feel real to me. Especially after those strangely sweet words of thanks from before. Feels like I've stepped in some multi-realistic dream. See, you really are quite scared, Katsukaki. And said quickly enough. The easiest pretender was the reason. The fact of the matter is, it's hard to blame this on her natural fearful self. Something else seems to have taken hold of the young woman trembling in my arms. Something powerful and difficult to understand. Skaki? Still fairly warm out, but her clothes are wet with rain. Only natural that her body temperature will fall. Tried to convince myself that's the only reason Kaki's trembling, but it doesn't quite work. Finally speaks, wringing the words out of her throat. Her voice is frail and utterly weak in a way I never would have thought possible from Scotty I know. Without the last of my strange explanations crumble. There's something new entirely inside of her I've never seen before.
We lost that.
Well, time to pause the recording, I guess. He is back with us. He is among the living again. Kaki's cowering in terror. Even minutes like thugs on a daily basis, even as she couldn't completely out of fear. She went about her business as usual, but that stubborn, prideful, resolute person seems to have melted away. I was left as a frightened, trembling little girl clinging to me with a light. A diesel locomotive passes overhead with a loud, sustained roar. Water that had gathered atop the bridge rains down by the side. The very air around us seems to shake. Kaki doesn't react. She dives up the body, maybe motionless except for a moment and waits for them to pass. Not a problem. Can't bring myself to ask for anything. That was obviously some beyond Skagi's behavior, but it was such a strong reaction that it feels wrong to ask her out of mere curiosity. The rain slaps heavily on the bridge above. The wind whistles loud about by outside, sometimes driving water inwards from the side. Now that the thunder has passed, Skaki seems to be gradually regaining her calm. Cuddling close, Skaki stares up into my eyes. Might look strong to you, but I've never thought of myself that way.
こうやって一人で生きていけているじゃない。私みたいに外に壁ばかり作っておきながら内側がボロボロな人間と違って。あなたにこういうことを頼むのは申し訳ないけれど。欲しいことがあるの。いいかしら。
Told you before, didn't I? If you want to talk, I'm willing to listen. Skaki nods in that small, soft tone she begins to tell me about herself. Rain shows no sign of letting up. The quiet voice flows past me and dissolves into the deepening darkness. The weakness of those words seems to echo the fragility of the girl in my arms. A certain place, you say? Oh boy, time to turn off my fucking webcam again.
Uh-oh.
The summer sun scorched the ground beneath our feet, very early in this one. In the heart of the ancient capital, we walked uphill, following the road away from the station's eastern exit. was talking, casually, with trouble
ねえお母さん、昨日ね、家の窓の外にワンちゃんがいたの。
Looking up at the person holding my hand, I smiled.
そう。
In contrast to my cheerful chattering, the woman walking by my side had a clouded expression on her face. Her profile was beautiful but cold, almost like that of a marble
私
statue.
の方を見たからね、手を振ったの。そしたらワンちゃんもこっちを向いたの。
そう。
Same word repeated in the same tone as if she was playing back a recording. Not understanding what that signified, I continued to speak.
私がいるってちゃんと分かったみたいなの。それでね。
That trivial little event must have made me very happy because I just kept on talking. Sentence flowed into sentence with barely a pause for breath in between. Matching the rhythm of my skipping steps, I pattered on faster and faster, filled with innocent
あのね、
excitement.
ユミコ。
First, her feet came to stop. Without turning to look at me, her face still in profile, my mother finally
ごめん
answered.
ね。ちょっと静かにしててくれるかしら。
A quiet voice emerged only to melt away into the squawking of the cicadas. Two pleasures, skipping into conversation. Abruptly taken from me, I hesitated uncertainly, not sure where to direct my gaze. Soon I found a clear path forward and my hesitation gave way to
ご
a
めんな
reply.
さい。お母さん。
Was the phrase I'm sorry. How many times I'd have spoken those words by then. Even when I'd done nothing wrong, even when I'd done nothing at all, those words offered an exit from my uncomfortable moment. From any uncomfortable moment. But above else, they lightened the burden on my mother's heart. Mumbling those words had always been the best that I could do at times like those.
ごめんね、ユミコ。
And my mother, in turn, offered me the same soft words of apology. In retrospect, it might well have been her fault that I developed the habit of relying on the words "I'm sorry." Spoke the phrase so frequently, it's probably only natural I began to
行
imitate
き
her.
ましょう。
Cold profile, a rigid face, locked in position, never turning to me. Speaking a few words with nothing but a slight movement of her lips, my mother began to walk once more, her strides even smaller than usual. With a nod, I stepped forward at my mother's side, slipping halfway under the shadow cast by her parasol. The shade swayed with her steps. As the shade swayed with her steps, the blazing sun flickered before my eyes like a movie shot on cheap film. He walked in silence through the midsummer heat, surrounded by the voices of the cicada. Can you shut the fuck up?
God damn.
Squeezed my mother's hand
You
tightly.
break
very
up the tender moment and all of a sudden they hear that angry voice.
ってー。
It'll. Oh, I was gonna say it'll stop.
I squeezed my mother's hand tightly, very tightly.
He
That
stopped it,
connection
alright.
was the only thing in the world I could rely on. My mother, Misako, was born into the Kawamoto family, owners of a real estate business in the ancient city of Kamakura. After graduating from the university, she accepted an arranged marriage to my father, Sakaki Michiaki. She was 25 years old. The Kawamoto were small-time landowners, and their business had fallen into financial problems. Their only daughter married the young president of East Beach Railways, a company that had taken complete control of the regional railroad network. The Kawamoto family treated it as a miracle comparable to winning the lottery.
音量設定。
I'll turn it back up to 3.
お帰りなさいませ。
ああ、
あなた、お食事は？
もう済ませた。いつものことを毎度毎度聞くんじゃない。着替えは？
はい、用意してあります。
すぐに支度する。30分後に出るから玄関に出して小島に渡しておいてくれ。
はい。
お父さん。
My father was a complete workaholic with more than one house to return to. He only came to see us once a week and never stayed longer than an hour. At that point, I hadn't so much as held a conversation with him. All I could remember were brief moments of eye contact in the hallway when we passed each other by. I can still remember the way he looked at me. There was no emotion in his gaze, not even contempt, almost as if he didn't even realize someone was there. His eyes were frighteningly empty. My room in that house was pointlessly large. Spacious as it was, it hadn't been made for a child to live in. The bed and closet were both adult-sized. For the most part, it looked like nothing more than just another guest room. Child's desk haphazardly purchased assortment of stuffed animals and toys. These were the only objects that suggested otherwise, and they felt deeply out of
どん
place.
な挨拶をしたらお父さん返事してくれるのかな。
I'll probably gun to the face. That make him talk real fucking quick.
Vituperative retort.
Probably fucking sing like a songbird even.
His trousers set aflame.
Practicing many different facial expressions, earnestly thinking over a problem with no
ど
solution.
んな顔をしたらお父さんは帰ってきてくれるのかな。
Though the room far too large for me, I thought about the stone-faced father I barely knew. How to catch his attention? How could I make him realize I was even
おは
there?
ようございます。おはようございます。おはようございます。違うのかな。どうなのかな。おはようございます。おはようございます。おはようございます。
With that staid and conservative railroad family, a daughter bore little weight. My mother's marriage had seemed a blessing for the Kawamoto family, but when she gave birth to me, it quickly became an uncomfortable topic. Her job had been to give birth to an heir to inherit the East Beach Empire. Instead, she had produced a daughter, at best a potential tool for political marriage. No one was to blame for that, but it was still a deep disappointment to those around her. My father had treated his new wife very kindly at first, but after I came into the world, he learned that my mother was too physically frail to endure many pregnancies. And he learned that he began noticeably brusque and distant. That transformation must have hurt my mother deeply. After it began, she grew gradually weaker in body and spirit until finally she could no longer manage to take care of father's personal needs. My mother returned to her parents when I was 6 years old. She endured as best as she could, desperate not to leave a bad impression on my father's family. But my mother was fundamentally a sheltered, fragile woman. Putting aside her physical condition, her mind had been worn down to the point where she could simply no longer cope. And so, one hot midsummer day, she gathered her luggage, took my hand, and left Sakaki
ただいま
House.
戻りました。
ああ、おかえり。
おかえりなさい。
It wasn't a joyous homecoming for anyone involved. After an exchange of indescribable and uncomfortable greetings, they began an equally awkward
ミ
conversation.
サコ、体の具合は？
大丈夫です。何もありません。それならしっかり直して道明さんのためにも早く戻ってあげないとね。はい。
It was obvious at a glance that my mother couldn't possibly go back anytime soon. Still, my pragmatic grandparents wanted their daughter back with the Sakaki family before the wound of separation grew too deep. My mother may have wanted to return herself, even knowing that she was no longer capable of enduring that life. There was a slight edge of frustration in her voice as she vaguely affirmed my grandparents'
お
words.
母さん。
They left me out of the conversation so completely that I began to feel invisible. In the end, I couldn't help but call out. When I spoke, my mother's hand twitched around mine, as if only just realizing that she had been pulling me along at her side. She'd been trying to forget an unpleasant reality by averting her eyes
由
from
美
it.
子、おじいちゃんとおばあちゃんにご挨拶なさい。
Still not looking in my direction, my mother muttered those words
おじ
quietly.
いちゃん、おばあちゃん、こんにちは。
I tried out the greeting I practiced for dad on my grandparents.
ああ、こんにちは。
こんにちは。
Their responses were stiff and awkward. They didn't so much just smile at me. It had already been decided my mother would be hospitalized. Originally, the doctors had recommended admitting her to a psychiatric ward.
Psychiatric.
Psychiatric, fuck. Words! But her return home under the cloud of a separation would no doubt become the subject of gossip in the area. Who knew what people would say about her mental illness on top of it all? Instead, Mom returned home under the superficial cover of poor health and entered the general hospital. My grandparents had been busy enough with their struggling business. Now they had new burdens on their hands, and they made no attempt to hide their exhaustion. The complaining began on the very first day.
かわいそうに。生まれたのが女の子じゃなかったら。
おい、やめないか。
だってあなただっておっしゃってたじゃありませんか。せっかくの機会だったのに台無しになってしまったって。
それはそうだが。
だから女の子だって分かった時にお医者様に強く言ってでもやり直しをすればよかったのですよ。
美佐子の体が持たないことはお前も分かっていたじゃないか。
でも
During the years I'd spent living with my mother's family, my grandparents never showed anything like affection. In retrospect, it was an unwanted burden, a symbol of failure. I suppose they hardly had any reason to welcome me. But even so, it was a form of
美
cruelty.
佐子も入院するし、由美子を学校に通わせないといけないし、どうしたらいいんだか。
榊の家からは生活費も出ているのだから、それでいいじゃないか。
よくありませんわよ。会社の方が当座の資金にも苦しい状況なのに、あなたどうしてそんなにのんきなことを言っていられるんですか？
おい、そんな言い方はないだろう。
Two of them seemed to quarrel virtually every minute of every day, right until I left the house. They were considerate enough not to behave this way around my mother, but the unwanted grandchild was a different story. Raw emotion flew back and forth as if I wasn't even
お
there.
犬さん可愛かったな。
When I was inside the house, I couldn't help hearing unpleasant conversations. It was a small mercy that we had one of the spacious gardens so typical in country towns. I'd always slip out when I saw my grandparents talk with serious expressions on their faces. I passed the time scratching the ground with the tree branches. The scribbles in the dirt became an escape. A portal to a vague, faraway world.
お家に帰るのかな。
Recalling what I'd seen through the window that day, I moved the point of my tree branch through the soil. Recalling a few happy memories, I drew them out one by one, over and over, hoping to make them even slightly more vivid in my mind. My drawing improved quickly in pursuit of a clear and unmistakable exit from reality. I carefully combed my shoulder-length hair and tied it back with a rubber band. I hadn't particularly been trying to grow it out, but once I understood that haircuts cost money, I'd simply allowed things to take their own course. Not to imply that my grandparents were keeping me in rags. They were far too vain for that. I always had the minimum necessary to look respectable. But ever since I'd grown old enough to understand my position, it was difficult to muster the slightest interest in fashion. I opted for plain, dark clothes, the more inconspicuous the better. My hair fell straight to the shoulder in the simplest possible style. As a child, I wanted nothing more than to be noticed. At some point, I began to seek refuge in my own anonymity. It seemed safer to be
行って
ignored.
きます。
Posing under the weathered eaves, I offered us farewell to no one particular, then walked off alone. I'd grown tall. I was wearing a middle school uniform now. Nobody had commented on either fact. Ever since arriving at this place, I'd been alone. There were always people in the house, but I was alone.
由美子嬢ちゃん、今日のお弁当ですよ。
ありがとう、トシエさん。
As I left the house, I found Toshia waiting outside. Toshia was an old woman who had looked after my grandparents' family for many years as their housekeeper. Even when the business fell on hard times, I could no longer afford the expense. She stayed in the house next door, taking care of us without any compensation. I wasn't her employer, but she always called me Miss in a kindly tone of voice. She was the only person in my life who showed me real
制
affection.
服、なんだか恥ずかしいな。
何を言いますか。
What the fuck?
嬢ちゃん、よう似合ってますよ。
The fuck was that?
That was just me probably clearing my throat.
That wasn't the sound of someone clearing the throat. That was the sound of someone barking.
What? How did it come out as barking? Oh well.
ありがとう。そんなこと言ってくれるの、トシエさんだけよ。
嬢ちゃん。
それじゃあ、行ってきます。
I didn't talk with anyone in my middle school, or rather I couldn't. It wasn't an insular place where relations had been long since been firmly established, often mirroring the connections between parents. Someone abruptly wedged in from the outside had very little hope of fitting in, much less for a quiet girl who had moved out to the country under circumstances like mine. None of the other children were friendly to me. I knew they talked about me behind my back. After the years I'd spent alone with my grandparents, I suppose I'd grown used to such casual disdain. My student life didn't feel particularly painful. It was merely empty. I filled the vast stretches of empty time by drawing pictures. It was a habit I picked up as a means of escaping into fantasy, but as I came to accept reality, the images changed gradually into simple landscapes. Not to say I was viewing things more positively now. I'd simply grown numb. To The contents of my drawings mattered less to me than the time I killed moving pencil over paper. No longer looked for meaning in the art itself. My grandfather had a pile of empty sketchbooks abandoned from the days he had time to pursue his hobbies. I made a rare request and took them as my own. Day in, day out, I filled their pages with dull landscapes. With mechanical movements, I drew hollow images of a hollow world. When school ended, I made my way over to the hospital where my mother was staying. The hospital was further from my grandparents' house than my middle school. To reach it, I had to walk a good 2 kilometers. First descending a slope, then climbing back up. I didn't have a bicycle, and asking for a bus fare would have been unpleasant, so I always traveled the road on foot. Of course, it wasn't pleasant, but I developed an obstinate streak in my own right. That hike had become a part of my daily routine.
あら、榊さん。こんにちは。
A familiar nurse got out to me as I walked down the familiar hallway.
こんにちは。今日はお母さん、朝から具合もいいみたいよ。ご飯もちゃんと食べてるし。そうですか。こうやって榊さんが毎日お見舞いに来てくれるからね。きっと。そんなことは。
An equivocating, weak smile, I nodded to the nurse and walked away. My mother's condition was always seesawing from improvement to setback. It wasn't a sort of disease that could be cured with some wonder drug. In my mother's case, the doctors didn't entirely understand the cause of her illness, or even the reasons she wasn't healing. There was no clear path to a complete recovery. At that point, I understood that my existence had a great deal to do with her sickness. My visits couldn't possibly have been helping her. It was probably just the opposite. I walked rapidly towards room 301 in the A ward. There was a part of me that thought those visits were pointless, but without him, I would have lost the only thing I had left, my origins. Even as I isolated myself behind an inconspicuous appearance, in that one place I desperately sought some kind of connection.
お母さん。
My mother had been given a private room. The hospital's administration was an old acquaintance of my grandfather's, so had been arranged at a considerable discount, or so our gossipy neighbors believed. It was a pure white room, largely empty except for the plain medical bed standing by the window. My mother passed her days lying there. There was no medical reason she couldn't go out, but she never tried.
Yumiko. 今日も来てくれたのね。
My mother greeted me with the most convincing smile she could force onto her face. But that face didn't turn toward
今日
me.
は具合がいいってさっき看護師さんが。
Setting up a folding chair at the bedside, I began to speak up. Her physician had asked me to fill the visits with conversation. Even the silliest little things will do. Just keep talking to her, please.
ご飯もちゃんと食べられてよかったね。
But I filled every moment with silly chat for a different reason entirely.
それでね。
Conversation was almost entirely one-sided. My mother's responses were mostly monosyllabic. It was difficult to tell if she was even listening. Even so, I continued to chatter away.
今日もいい天気だね。
Eventually ran out of things to talk about and changed the topic to the weather out of desperation. But by then, even the monosyllabic responses had trickled to a halt. Time flowed by in silence. 1 minute of stillness. 3, 5. Finally, my mother slowly opened her mouth to speak. Even before the words came out, my body twitched in
ごめん
alarm.
ね。本当に。お母さん、こんなんで。
そんなこと。
When my mother spoke to me, it was always to deliver an apology. That was why I babbled away so persistently. I didn't want to give her the chance to
今日は
speak.
もう帰るね。
そう。
Following the chair with a few practice movements, I leaned against a small shelf of
そ
the
れ
wall.
じゃあまた明日。
Came to this place in search of connection, and every day I went home with nothing but disappointment. To be honest, those visits were painful for me. Sometimes I thought about how much nicer it would be just to stop coming entirely. Without my faint connection to my mother, I would be adrift in a sea of nothingness. I had no choice but to hold stubbornly to that single lifeline. It wasn't under any illusion that my conversations with Mom were doing her any good. In fact, her physician had begun to indirectly allude otherwise. Something along the lines of, "You don't have to come every single day, dear." I was afraid, but my mother did recover. If I abandoned her now, she might not take me with her when she returned to our old home. Didn't have many pleasant memories of that place, but at least there was something other than an object of scorn. At least there I had something like an identity. I couldn't return unless my mother took me with her. I hated myself for those selfish thoughts, but I didn't stop visiting. Pushing everything that had brought us here brought us there out of my mind, I clung stubbornly to the childish hope of a happy ending waiting around the next corner. The first year of my middle school life flowed by aimlessly. The only thing I had gained in that time was a bit of textbook knowledge. Apart from that, I hadn't learned a thing. Fairly sure my grades were good. Didn't want to give anyone the chance to criticize me on that front. Becoming a difficult child would be too risky. My place in the world was tenuous enough as it was. Thinking back on it now, I might have been happier just running away. But having spent my entire life shut up inside a box, the idea of trying to escape didn't even occur to me. Just 1 year ago, I said goodbye to no one in particular and left the house alone. Nothing had changed. The scenery was the same, my life was the same, everything in that country town was static.
奥様と旦那様を恨まないでやってくださいな。元はとてもお優しい方だったんですよ。
That morning when Toshi handed me my lunchbox, I found myself grumbling a few rare complaints about my situation. The targets were mainly my grandparents. We'd been living together for many years now, and still they only spoke to me when it was absolutely necessary. Every moment I spent in that house made me feel as if I was slowly suffocating.
だけど、おじいちゃんもおばあちゃんも、まるで私がいないかのような態度を取るんだもの。
貧すれば心も鈍する。今は由美子嬢ちゃんに構って差し上げられる余裕がないんですよ。家業の具合がようなればそれも変わってくると思いますからの。
そうなのかしら。
由美子嬢ちゃんはこんなにいい子なんですから、いつかきっとちゃんと見てくださいますよ。それまではこのババで我慢してくださいな。
我慢だなんて、としえさんにはいつもお世話になりっぱなしで。
嬢ちゃん。
Nothing about our household had changed in years. As always, our lifestyle was dependent on Toshia's quiet assistance. She took care of us all without a single complaint. But I hadn't seen my grandparents show her gratitude for everything she did, not even once. Toshia's son, who lived with his wife in the neighborhood, clearly wanted to pry his mother away from her unrewarded servitude to the Kawamoto family. I'd have heard him having a heated fight on the topic. Our life was the same as it had always been, but beneath the surface it was slowly coming apart at the seams.
としえさん、もう来てくれなくなるのかな。
One day I was making my way along the sloped road I had once walked with my mother, bombarded by the cries of cicadas. Yeah, I remember my grandparents' house was a district with strict regulation on the height and variety of buildings, so the scenery hadn't changed much in the years since my mother entered the hospital. It was picturesque in a way that seemed to appeal to rich people. Many city dwellers had their second houses nearby, but I could never come to enjoy the scenery. It left me cold. Things that mattered to me changed for the worse. Things I hated, things that left me cold, never seemed to go away. Driven by frustrating, distinct feelings of powerlessness, I began to walk faster. But with a flinch of surprise, my legs suddenly came to a halt.
おはよう、由美子ちゃん。学校に行くところ？歩きながらでいいからさ、ちょっとおじさんの話に付き合ってもらえないかな。
My leg began to move once more, faster than before. Striding along almost like a race walker, I hurried down the road leading to my school.
お父さんがね、最近またちょっとおじさんの耳に入ってくるようなことをやっててね。二宮さんって由美子ちゃんの知り合いにいなかった？ちょうどお母さんと同じぐらいの年の女の人なんだけど、もし知ってたら。それとこれは由美子ちゃんの家のことなんだけど、お母さんが昔お父さんと一緒に。
おじさん。
お、なんだい由美子ちゃん。
前にも言いましたが、私何も言いません。質問にも答えません。だからこうやってまとわりつくのをやめてください。
いや、だからだね由美子ちゃん。
名前で慣れ慣れしく呼ぶのもやめてください。失礼します。
やれやれ。父親譲りだな、ありゃ。
There was one significant change in my stagnant life. A reporter from a gossip magazine, whose job seemed to consist of digging for information on my father, was making a habit of loitering around me. I had first met him during the winter of my first year in junior high. At the time, I was still comically naive. He approached with kind words and sympathy to things I wasn't used to getting, and convinced me to open up to him about my family circumstances. Pathetic as it was, I didn't realize it was all for an article until the moment my grandmother threw the tabloid in my face and delivered a furious scolding. Humiliated and bitter, I swore to myself to never again discuss personal matters with strangers, or to trust their compassion. Despite it all, the very same journalist had the nerve to show his face in front of me again. Every time something happened, he'd come around sniffing for scraps of information. Speaking of him, I felt like brushing against an enormous and particularly slimy leech. I marched ahead as quickly as I could, one fierce step after another, trying to shake off the lingering residue of our encounter. But then again, the place I was hurrying to wasn't exactly pleasant in its own right.
駅前んとこのさ、ロータリーのとこでヤマッチいたんよ。声かけたらあいつ逃げやがってさ。
あいつ最近付き合い悪いよな。彼女できたのかな。やっぱ。
嘘。ヤマッチ誰かと付き合ってんの？
あれ知らんかった？ C 組の木本いんじゃん。あいつどう？
Would have been much easier if they'd simply treated me like I didn't exist. Their clumsy method of ignoring me could sometimes become a weapon as sharp as any insult. I was well past the point of letting each and every sudden silence weigh in my mind, but it still wasn't exactly a pleasant feeling.
今日も来てんぞ。
あいつ、成績はいいけど、母親は入院してんだよな。
きっとあの子もさ、そういうのを。
When I tried to ignore them, the more their whispers seemed to pierce their way into my ears. A year had passed since I'd first set foot in school, but then there wasn't a single person in my class who didn't know all about my family. There's no such thing as privacy in the countryside. The real nature of my mother's illness, which should have been kept absolutely confidential by the hospital, had filtered all the way down to middle schoolers' gossip. A purely academic question occurred to me. If this wasn't despair, then what exactly would qualify? I had my sketchbook beneath my desk, making sure that nobody could see. I'd kept up my art, and flipping through the book, it was obvious that my ability to predict fine details had come a long way in the last year. But all it really proved was how obsessively I'd sought to escape. How deeply yet detached I'd grown from the world around me. Rather than pride, I felt something like nausea. Even my art was beginning to lose its value as a refuge. The room was pure white. Nothing had changed here. The room, not even my mother's posture by her bed. It was as if I'd never left. Every time I walked in that door and saw her sitting there, I felt a surge of irrepressible pity run through me.
お母さん、来たわよ。
あ、由美子。いらっしゃい。
As always, I saw my mother in profile. As always, her gaze didn't turn to me. As always, she smiled quietly, but there was no tenderness in the expression. She was simply moving her face into that shape. It was an imitation of a real smile.
持ってきたから。
I lowered a small bundle of books and weekly magazines my mother had requested onto the shelf beside her bed. They usually came with the mail, but sometimes I had to run into a nurse who would hand them over to me for a more personal delivery.
そう。ありがとう。
Of course, the weeklies in question were respectable, established publications that had largely kept away from the scandals and rumors circulated by the tabloids. Couldn't take the risk of her reading something like that article I'd unwittingly contributed to the previous winter. It undoubtedly would have set back her treatment, which was already proceeding slowly enough. My mother's newfound reading habit seems to be part of her attempt to learn more about my father and the company's running. Looking at that thick pile of magazines and books, I felt my chest tighten at her obvious desperation. Mom had never known much about the business. I would have been surprised if she could understand half of what she was
ご
reading.
飯残してるみたいね。看護師さんが言ってた。
そう。
今度、トシエさんにご飯作ってきてもらうね。病院のよりはずっと美味しいと思うから。
そう。
Our interactions followed the same familiar pattern. I chatted away relentlessly while my mother muttered vaguely. Lately, even those monosyllabic responses had grown repetitive and careless, as if she was beginning to retreat to treat the world with the same careless disinterest my father had shown her. It was a particularly difficult visit. My mother barely spoke, and I ran out of things to say fairly quickly. The hours I spent at school had grown increasingly suffocating. I was spending more and more time wandering around in search for quiet places where I could be alone. These days, I frequently found myself lacking for stories to tell.
そろそろ帰るわ。
I was quietly for my seat. My mother's face is always turned toward me. That'd be a truly pathetic excuse for a conversation. I had little hope tomorrow would be any better. The things I wanted to stay the same fell apart. Things I wanted to change stayed exactly as they were. Time no longer seemed to be flowing. It was a stagnant, brackish pool, and even treading water was becoming a struggle. But as I prepared to leave, my mother spoke. It hadn't happened for quite some time. That one word came as a complete surprise. Was she about to say something? Despite it all, I found myself pausing expectantly, hoping for some positive sign. Thinking the matter overcalmly was foolish to even imagine her mood had suddenly changed, but I was so starved for a glimmer of hope that my mind latched onto the most optimistic possible interpretation. It's gonna be the opposite. And then, with a few simple words, my naive, happy-ended scenario shattered like the fragile pieces of glass that had always been.
あなたが男の子だったらよかったのにね。
My mother had never said anything like that before. No doubt the thought had crossed her mind, but so long as she had even a shred of rationality remaining, the words could never have passed her lips. After all, if she were to say that, then nothing could ever change except to fall apart.
そうじゃなかったのかな。
Something slipped out of my hands and clattered to the floor. A visitor from the company had dropped off a few jelly desserts. I'd been taking one from the shelf with a spoon. My mother had been skipping her meals lately, but I thought she might at least manage to eat that. Considering the season, the white peach jelly seemed appropriate. It would be easier for her to hold a spoon with a flat handle. Moments before, those were the only thoughts in my mind. They were gone now, obliterated by my mother's words so completely that it was as if they had never existed. I ran as fast as I could, pushing my heart so hard that I thought it might just butter to a stop. Down the slope in front of the hospital, up again, onto the large curving detour, past the station, around the corner from a small cleaning store, into the remains of an abandoned factory. Only then, absolutely confident that I was alone, did I finally come to a halt. Gasping for air, I doubled over and held my trembling legs with both hands, propping up a body that seemed ready to collapse. The road flickered before my oxygen-starved eyes. My peripheral vision was dim and clouded, as though I was peering out from inside a tunnel. I could feel sweat pouring out from all over my body. My hair and clothes were completely disheveled. I'd fallen at some point on the way over, or scrapes on my knee and elbow, pushed myself erect, a tattered mess of a girl. But I couldn't have cared less for any of them. After all, the tears streaming uncontrollably down my face were far more blatantly pathetic than my beat-up clothing. I could have endured it if she complained about something I could fix. Could have behaved better. There was still room for my grades to improve. Could have made myself more presentable. Could have cut every strand of hair to the exact same length. Could have learned to walk in a refined way at an absolutely steady pace. But no matter what, I was powerless to undo the reality of my own birth. Why'd you have to choose the one thing I could never ever change? I know, dramatic scene. I know, a very dramatic scene, but all I think is like Persona 4 fans be like, wow, she must be trans. Because this is like literally almost the same situation, just like with a much more negative twist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Persona 4 quote unquote fans would still be like, oh hell, she must be a fucking trans person. I don't care what others say. The only thing that matters is my fucking ego.
Why are people like this?
Like, it's one thing if it was left up to interpretation in Persona 4. Like, the kanji thing? Read into that as much as you want. Like, I personally think that it is entirely just lashing out in his case. But for Naoto, the game literally states that the entire reason why she wants to fucking become a boy is the disrespect women get in the Japanese police force. It straight up states that, and the finale of her fucking social link is her accepting she is a woman. That will not change, and she does not have a problem with that not changing. And then these assholes come in like, I don't care about her character development, I will mold her into what I want her to be. Which makes it, does that make them any better than the Japanese police force? Not really.
No.
Like, the problem is the hypocrisy. Like, that movement is all about don't be what others want you to be what you want to be yourself. But then they force their own ideas onto other fucking things and characters because it fucking advances their goddamn agenda. If you're trans, I'm happy for you. Be whoever you want to be. The moment you try to drag others into it, that's where the problem starts. You're you, I'm me, I'm gonna be who I want to be, you can be who you want to be. But the moment you try to tell me who I should be, I will violently beat you to a bloody pulp. My grandparents were right back then. It was possible. She should have just tried again. Should have crushed that egg in the womb and pretended it never happened. Better that than this hopelessness. It's an irreparably broken life. Placed my hands against my breasts. I pushed down with all my strength. How could a thing so totally beyond my control bring me such misery? Felt a dull throbbing pain deep inside my chest. Painful pressure was accompanied by a slight twinge of stimulation. Even as I rejected it, my body reminded me that I was female. That was pain. At the same time, I could feel the blood throughout my body begin to stir in an unfamiliar way. Distinctly, I knew that it was something sexual, and that shivered with pure loathing. I hated my body. I hated the woman I was becoming. Didn't ask for that misery. I had no say in my crime. It was born with me. But so long as I lived, the pain would always be lurking somewhere deep inside me. If only I'd been a boy, with one phrase anyone could reduce me to nothing. I could study all I want. I could be the sweetest, most well-behaved person in the world. But so long as I stayed in that body, my naked vulnerability would never go away. I threw open my bag and took out my pencil box. Flipping open the lid, I retrieved the box cutter I used as a makeshift sharpener for my colored pencils. I wonder when exactly began to find the act of cutting things apart pleasant. That clicking blade emerging from its sheath, the sound of something once whole being severed. Those had come calming sounds to me. wonderful it would be if I could slice away my femininity with a single box cutter. How wonderful it would be if I could sever my fate with a touch of a blade. How wonderful would it be if one movement of my hand would cut me free of all the troubles that coiled around me and choked the air from my lungs. As I cut savagely through the long, identical bundles of black, such thoughts never ran through my head one after another. On the boiling concrete, speckled with remnants of faded paint, clumps of black gathered. They fell like a violent rain until the sun hit the ground was covered in them. I could feel the gloom in my heart fading as I looked down into the darkness, but in its place that dirty blackness left a layer of filth inside me that could never be cleaned away.
バカマジちげえってそれ嘘つけそれお前はおいなんだってうわ何あの髪型男みてえだよな
切っちゃったのかな自分でかなでもなんで
あいつんちまた金なくなったんじゃないのまさか散髪代ぐらい出るだろうそれ
Yeah. Even kids can be pretty merciless when young.
Oh no, kids are especially merciless actually.
Kids are cruel, Jack.
Like, kids will take one look at you and find the exact words to say to make you feel maximum pain.
Yeah.
Fucking, I 100% subscribe to John Mulaney's logic with this.
だよね
When I showed up for school with a hairstyle more appropriate for a boy, my classmates' reaction was exactly what I expected. They made no effort to hide their amusement. I'd gotten that far uneventfully, not giving them much to work with. So perhaps there was a bit of a recoil effect. Whatever the case, my rough bob cut became an easy target for mockery and speculation. Of course, there wasn't a single person there who showed me any concern for me. My grandmother was simply lost for words at first. Not that the aghast expression on her face meant she was worried about me.
そんなみっともないことはこれっきりにしてちょうだい。わかりましたね。
The one and only thing she was concerned about was how poorly my actions would appear in the eyes of society.
ごめんなさい。
まったく恥ずかしい。
My grandmother, muttering about shame and humiliation, averted her eyes and disappeared inside the house. And for a very long time I sat alone in my room, utterly silent, except for the voices of the cicadas.
おお、由美子嬢ちゃん、どうなさったんですか。
ごめんなさい。
嬢ちゃんは何も悪くないのに、おかわいそうに。
Toshia was the only person who showed genuine concern for me, but it didn't make me feel any better to know I'd made the kind old woman worry. More than anything else, her sorrowful face made me regret my rashness. I'd gotten carried away by my emotions and lashed out, but nothing had changed. Nothing was going to change. For the sake of the one or two people who acknowledged my existence, I decided not to repeat my mistake. Toshia's death came soon thereafter. As the record-setting heatwave stretched on, the news was constantly occupied with stories of elderly people succumbing to heat stroke. One day our neighbor, already past her 70th year, was among them.
すみませんが、お帰りいただけませんか。
そんな、せめてお焼香だけでも。
由美子さん、あなたも知ってるでしょう。
それは
お給金が出るわけでもないのに、ねぎらいの言葉すらかけてもらえず、川本の家のために働き続けて。
申し訳ないと思っています。だった
らもううちとは関わらないでください。もう川本の家とは一切の関係をなくしたいんです。地元でも変な噂が立ってますし。
おい早苗、それぐらいにしておきなさい。
はい、わかりました。それじゃこれで。
お礼だけでも言いたかった。
Your world was supposed to grow larger as you grow up. Mine seemed only to be shrinking even smaller. I'd lost Toshia, and with her, the small place of refuge in front of our door vanished as well. Just as I was on the verge of giving up, finally, at long last, a small ray of light broke through the wall of dark clouds.
お母さん、具合いいみたいね。
My mother was eating a mandarin orange served as a treat after a meal. Her expression was as placid as always.
今日はなんだか体も軽く感じるわ。
But for once, it didn't look like a mask she'd plastered onto her face. The peace in her eyes seemed real, something that flowed naturally to the surface from deep inside her. Our retreat to the quiet of the countryside hadn't done much at first. If anything, our family tensions had probably taken a toll on my mother. But after many years of peace, it seemed her mind was slowly beginning to regain its equilibrium. The recent downturn had given way to weeks of steady improvement. Once you can meet your own needs, it becomes possible to worry about the needs of others. My mother had begun to give my questions real responses for the first time in years.
お医者さんもいい兆しだっておっしゃってたし、来週からはお薬も減らしていくっていうことだったから、それで。
We were able to discuss her treatment, but lately it had become a safe topic of conversation. Specifically, her progress was so promising that a discharge from the hospital was coming into view at long
来
last.
週の月曜日、おばあちゃんと一緒に先生にお話を聞くから、そこでいろいろと今後のことも聞いてくるわね。あと、
由美子。
何？お母さん。
由美子。ね、ごめんね。お母さん、ひどいこと言って。あなたにこれだけしてもらっておいて、私、男の子の方がいいとか。
お母さん、いいから。ほら、みかん食べたから手が汚れてる。はい、ティッシュ。食べた皮片付けるわね。
ありがと
う。いいのよ。お母さんは直すことに専念してくれればいいから。私、そろそろ戻るね。また明日来るから。
そう。ゆっくりしていけばいいのに。
また明日来るから。
Stood up and waved goodbye with a quavery smile. My mother was still sitting in profile, but I could tell she was smiling in return. Holding that image in my mind, I slipped quietly out of the room. The moment I closed the door behind me, the door began to shimmer through the wall of tears. I couldn't remember the last time my mother had shown that kind of concern for me. I didn't know if she ever had. It was standard of a healthy parent-child relationship. I guess it was an insignificantly small thing. But for me, at that moment, those tentative words of compassion were enough to inspire overwhelming happiness. Happiness so strong that I couldn't help but break down and sob.
よくなる。よくなってる。
I spoke the words again and again as if to fix that fact more firmly in reality. Perhaps Toshi had taken pity on me and stopped by to heal my mother on her way to heaven. Things were suddenly moving in such a positive direction that such thoughts seemed almost plausible. Next week, my grandmother and I went to meet with Mom's physician for an update on her condition. Normally, I was the only one who attended those meetings, but the progress was significant enough that he asked Grandma to come as well.
美佐子さんは間違いなく解放に向かっています。
Flipping through the papers in his hand, he gave us a detailed account of my mother's symptoms and current status. Not that I really needed to hear any of it, I already knew she was recovering. For someone who'd visited her every single day for years, it wasn't possible to miss the transformation.
それで、もう娘は大丈夫なんでしょうか?
Oh, I'm sure you don't care if she's okay, you just care if a fucking uterus is okay.
Yeah.
Once the doctor's explanation came to an end, my grandmother leaned forward, clinging to his arm as she
治療も順調に進んでおりますし、このまま退院の準備を始めてもいいでしょう。
The moment those words left his mouth, my grandmother lowered her head so deeply I thought she might topple out of her chair and prostrate herself on the floor.
ありがとうございます。ありがとうございます、先生。
やめてください。頭をお上げになってください。
これで榊さんの家にも申し訳が立ちます。ありがとうございます。
Grandma continued to lavish her thanks on the doctor, as always doing her best to pretend I wasn't even in the room. Mom's return to her husband would ensure that the Kawamoto business would continue receiving support from the Sakaki family. It was blatantly obvious from my grandmother's words that it was the sole reason for her gratitude. To the woman who brought her into the world, my mother had was nothing but a defective political tool, but that only strengthened my determination to take care of her. Once the doctor's explanation was over, my grandmother went straight home without even stopping by to see her daughter's face. I heard her muttering the names of business partners to herself as she went. She was probably planning to hurry back to the house and inform them of the news. But again, I wasn't exactly eager to ever visit my mother with that sort of attitude. So if anything, her quick departure was convenient.
お母さん、来週退院が決まったわ。
Dropping a pile of magazines and books onto the shelf as usual, I spoke to my mother in a tone of sincere cheerfulness.
じゃあおばあちゃんやおじいちゃんに迷惑をかけることもなくなるのね。何よりこうやって由美子に来てもらわなくても大丈夫になるから、それが一番安心ね。
お母さん、
私由美子にこうして負担をかけてるのが本当に申し訳なかったから。
My mother spoke those words with real remorse in her voice. But at that moment, the burden didn't seem so heavy. My mother's feelings were more than enough
カーテ
compensation.
ン開けてもらえるかしら。
Just as requested, I pulled back the curtains from the window at Mom's side. A vault of blue stretched out beyond the panes of glass. It was the very picture of a summer sky. Compared to the heart of the city where the Sakaki house stood, the blue of that place seemed far more pure and
今
vivid.
日もいい天気ね。ここを出るときには一度屋上に上がって空を見てみたいわ。
Toshia told me that once that my mother had always enjoyed gazing at the sky. She didn't look for anything in particular, just tilted her head back and watched. And when people asked her why, she could never find an answer. Memories from that day we first came to the town flashed in my mind. We walked hand in hand under a beautiful blue sky, but mother's dull, lifeless eyes had never left the path below her feet. But she had finally remembered the sky. That could only mean she was on her way to
そうだ
recovery.
ね。ここを出るときには一緒に空を見ようね。
そうね。
It occurred to me that I didn't have a single memory of the two of us doing something like that together. I found myself very much looking forward to the small event that would accompany my mother's discharge from the hospital. Everything was moving in a positive direction. Stupidly optimistic scenario had stretched out and my imagination was coming closer and closer to reality. My mother's recovery produced clear changes in my own emotions. I had barely spoken to anyone in weeks since Toshia's death, but I was slowly beginning to communicate with those around me. My grandparents still kept their distance, but if I approached them myself using my mother as a pretext, I could at least get them to have a conversation with me. Mom's recovery was their primary objective, after all. They couldn't avoid hearing me out if I brought it up. Watching my grandparents interact with me despite obvious reluctance, I felt as though I'd achieved a small but insignificant rebellion against people who'd spent years ignoring my very existence. Right here, I'm in an important position. More than anything else, that sense of meaning gave me strength. In school, the others still rejected my very existence, but that didn't bother me much anymore. I'll be returning to Sakaki House once my mother recovered. This hollow school life would be over soon enough. The end was in sight. That suffocating feeling of entrapment was gone. No matter what they said about me, no matter how much they laughed, it rolled off me harmlessly. 3 days before my mother was scheduled to leave the hospital, I was hurrying to school through the rain. The drizzle that had begun a little after midnight was just picking up into a steady, heavy rain as I left the house. My umbrella wasn't enough to catch it all. Pausing for a moment, I glanced up at the angry sky beyond the edge of my umbrella. It was covered in deep black clouds from horizon to horizon, without so much as a patch of clear sky in between. Well,
Oh no.
never a good sign.
お母さん、
Yeah, be afraid. Be very afraid.
I think we're about to find out why she doesn't like thunder.
Yeah. Thunderbolt and lightning, very, very frightening her.
You're a horrible person.
But how long do we know each other now? You should know that by now.
Let's just get this over with.
This conversation the other day, Mum had begun to spend a lot of time looking out the window. It was nice enough when the weather was clear, but staring at the menacing sky like that might inspire a bit of gloominess just as the feelings of the family started to take an upward swing. I have to hurry to the hospital and cheer Mom up as soon as school was over. With that thought, I began to walk again. And just as I reached the intersection between the road and school, road to school and the main street leading to the station, a familiar face appeared from around the corner.
どうもどうも。由美子ちゃん、久しぶりだね。
おじさん、
That it wasn't a face I was eager to see. Instantly recognized the tabloid reporter who had once wheeled me into becoming a source for an article that mixed fragments of truth with innuendo and lies. Standing on a large jet-black umbrella that seemed to mirror the rain clouds above, he looked me over with a faint smile on
い
his
や
face.
ー、しばらく見ないうちに可愛くなったね。お母さん譲りかな、それともお父さんに似たのかな。
His words seemed to have grown even greasier and more presumptuous than before. When I walked past him silently, the reporter fell easily in beside me, keeping pace as though I'd invited him to
ちょっ
follow.
と聞きたいことがあってね。またここに来るようになったんだけど、そこの喫茶店で話とか聞かせてくれないかな。
以前にも言いましたよね。私はあなたにお話しするようなことは一切ありません。
そんな、君のお父さんのことじゃないか。話すことなんかたくさんあると思うんだけどな。
ありません。父とはもう何年も会っていないんです。
It was incredibly unpleasant to have this man bring up that topic now. The Skaki house was an invisible mass around which we all orbited. We knew my current lifestyle was possible only because of his financial support, but sometimes I couldn't help feeling a powerful thirst or resentment towards a father I barely knew. In particular, when people carelessly assumed you must have some kind of
もうい
relationship.
いですから、付きまとわないでください。変な噂を立てられるので。
Stopping briefly, I spat out the clearest possible rejection, then quickly turned around to leave. Couldn't allow trouble of this sort to arise so soon before Mom was to leave the hospital. There was no telling her to. I was speaking to this man for even the briefest of moments might come back to haunt
本
me.
当にそうなのかな。
The reporter, no longer trying to follow, called out to me from behind. His words were suggestive, his tone unusually serious. Came to halt despite myself.
何なんですか、一体。
Rationally, I understood. It would have been the same either way. I know that it wasn't the cause of what would follow. But still, somewhere deep down inside, I can't help believing everything would have been different if only I'd walked
そう
away.
もいかないんだよ。だってこの話、君に弟ができたってことなんだからね。
Okay, this line has no voice. What?
弟。
I turned back to face and the man was wiping at his rain-damp forehead with a knowing smirk
こ
on
れ
his
に
face.
載ってるよ。もっとも、由美子ちゃんが読むような雑誌じゃないけどね。
The reporter reached out and presented me with a magazine already open to a certain article. Practically grabbing it from his hands, I ran my eyes frantically across the page. The moment I saw that headline, the blood in my veins seemed to freeze solid. East Beach Express President Skaki Michiaki's illegitimate child, long-awaited son born to a mistress. Bold sans serif headlines emphasized by sharp decorative flourishes. Below the face of a man I hadn't seen in a while lined up with the portrait of his unfamiliar partner. Paragraphs full of vicious words that I could barely stand to read, and to the end, one sentence that plunged me below even despair, as I had doubted my ears in a hospital room weeks before. This time I doubted my eyes. Currently arranging for a divorce from his wife. Those few words buried in the final paragraphs of the, as if they were the most trivial thing in the world, hit me with the force of a hurricane. Heard the rumors. More or less understood that father was that sort of person. But there's no way worse to have those suspicions confirmed. Why now when my mother was recuperating in the hospital? By now when she was finally getting better. This was article even true. Many thoughts whirled chaotically through my head. My hands trembled and lost their hold on that hateful piece of paper.
ちょっと落とさないでよ。これだって一応資料なんだからさ。
The magazine fell to the wet pavement with a slap. As it hit the ground, the pages that had been folded blank flipped around, revealing the cover. And as if to turn the dagger of my wound, one final piece of information was revealed to me. A tasteful work from a well-known painter, behind a number of carefully arranged headlines in a firm serif typeface. A weekly magazine, one that clearly distinguished itself from the tabloid and gossip rags. A magazine of some credibility. A magazine my mother's asked for every week.
というわけで、ぜひこの件について お姉ちゃんとしてコメントを聞きたいんだけど、ちょっと、おい
Anything for a headline.
Yeah, there's a reason why the moment you see, like, if you're ever at a blind date and hear the blind date mention that she's a journalist, just leave.
Yeah.
Like, especially since, like, I saw one there where the reaction to being turned down after finding out that she's a journalist was to grab the dude's name and run them through the fucking criminal databases. To dig up fucking dirt on him. Journals are fucking insane. Jogging up the sidewalk that ran alongside the prefectural highway, I sprinted all out along the farm road, standing diagonally away to the fields of green. I didn't turn toward my school as it offered an ever so slightly more direct route. So it offered an ever so slightly more direct route. But it was only a farm road, in places that hadn't even been paved. There was an extremely little course to run on a rainy day. I didn't have the luxury of worrying about that right at the moment. I needed to get to the hospital as soon as possible. As I possibly could, I needed to stop my mother. With the recent improvement of her condition, Mom had started to leave her room and visit the hospital store to purchase her own books and magazines. The nurses were still delivering them with the mail. There was at least a chance they'd check for articles that might upset her. But it was hard to imagine the clerk in the shop would have been told to do the same. Halfway there, I could no longer muster the effort to keep my umbrella right above me. I let the rain strike on me and focus all my attention on running. Water went flying with every heavy stride, slapping against my legs, soaking my skirt. A small ember of satisfaction warming my chest only minutes before I'd been smothered completely out of existence. I was cold to my very core.
ちょっと廊下を走らないでください。すみません。
Momentum barely slowed after arriving at the hospital. I understood perfectly well that running in the hallways was off limits. By the rules I'd always obeyed, I mattered less than reaching my destination even a moment sooner. Turning a corner to the third floor, I finally entered the wing reserved for private rooms. A moment later, my feet came to an abrupt halt. There was something unusual going on in front of the familiar door. For a moment, I was simply bewildered. Three strange men in expensive suits were standing just outside my mother's room, talking to each other, just on the verge of entering. A vague but powerful sense of dread ran through my body like a jolt of electricity. Shouted angrily as I approached. The man who had been reaching for the door hesitated. Before I could continue, the white-haired man at the head of the little group preempted me with a question.
失礼ですが、どちら様ですか？
この病室の榊美佐子の娘です。あなたたちこそ誰なんですか？母に何のご用ですか？
Unperturbed by my fierce attitude, the white-haired man answered with a calm smile.
あなたが由美子さんですね。申し遅れました。私、榊家の顧問弁護士をしております。
顧問弁護士？
ええ。この度はお母様の件でちょっとお話がございまして、立ち寄らせていただきました。
Magazine article I'd
お
read
母様はいらっしゃいますか？
Magazine article I'd read minutes before flashed vividly before my eyes. Currently arranging for a divorce. In a heartbeat, my mind connected those words to his lawyer's sudden
すい
arrival.
ません。
は？
あと、父を離婚させるために来たのでしょう。今、母は病気なんです。そんな話なんかしたらどうなるかわかるでしょう。
由美子さん、それは誤解です。私たちはその件ではなく、今後のお二人のことについて。
嘘！さっき雑誌で見たわ。全部知ってるんだから。
Man's composed face distorted into a scowl at the word magazine. Must have been trying to reach us before that information did.
仕方ないな。おい。
はい。
The small movements of the lawyer's hand, the two men who had been hanging back moved quickly toward me. They had me physically subdued before I could even register surprise. One man had slipped behind me and caught my arms in a firm, full Nelson. The other stood in front of me like a wall eliminating any chance of escape. I screamed desperately, but they weren't the sort of people to flinch at the cries of a young woman. The private wing was never a busy place. Today it was entirely empty, with the heavy rain coming down inside without anyone else in the building even heard my voice. And of course, against the strength of two full-grown adults, a child like myself was completely powerless. The lawyer's voice had grown cold. It was the all-too-familiar voice of our adult.
榊美佐子さん、弁護士の津田と申します。お話があって参りました。
His words were extremely polite, if anything, that made them all the more frightening. Ignoring my tear-choked plea, he pushed open the door to my mother's hospital room. I was the first to react. The bed sitting by the window, which had always been occupied before, was now empty.
Grisaiaか。まあいい。待たせてもらうこととしよう。
In contrast to the perpetually calm lawyer, I was filled with a profound sense of unease. The doctors always made their rounds at this time of the day. None of the patients were allowed to move around freely, much less my mother. They had given her a normal space for the sake of camouflage, but by all rights she belonged in a room with bars on the window. Normally it wouldn't be unusual to move a patient only 3 days from discharge back to the hospital's general ward, but my mother's condition was still delicate. The physician had decided to handle everything cautiously until the very end. It just wasn't possible that Mom had simply stepped out at this time of day.
何ですか、あなたたちは。
The doctor had arrived from his daily rounds. For a moment, he simply stared at the bizarre scene inside the room with confusion in his eyes. Before the lawyer could stand to offer a greeting, he yelped out from the corner where the man had positioned him.
ついさっきまでここにいたと報告を受けていたんですが、そうだろう。
He turned to the nurse at his side for confirmation, a hint of alarm in his voice.
はい、確認しましたので、そう伝えましたが。
The startled nurse looked around the room as if expecting to find my mother hiding in a corner. It was all too much for me to process. Everything was moving forward smoothly only an hour ago. Now we were derailed, hurtling rapidly away into the darkness and confusion, all of our painstaking work falling apart around us. I had looked for my mother. I had to keep her from finding out about that article. I had to get out of this room, away from these people. Countless thoughts stampede wildly through my head. But there was just one thing that seemed clear to me. I couldn't just sit there waiting for anything else. I had to find Mom. All of a sudden I remembered.
ここを出るときには一度屋上に上がって空を見てみたいわ。
Oh boy.
Oh, whoops, I think I just saw her past the window.
Please, we don't want actual
Terrible.
replays, but Michiru is rude.
Oh.
The words rang out so clearly in my ears that for a moment I thought she was really there, speaking to me. Pushing my way around the man who'd been holding me in check, I slipped past the doctor and dashed out into the deserted hallway.
こら、待ちなさい。
I heard voices from behind. I ignored them. I didn't have any real proof. There was nothing else for me to go on, so I had no choice but to cling to my intuition. Taking the stairs two at a time, I headed to the very top of the building. By the time I managed to struggle all the way to the rooftop, my breath was coming in quick, ragged gasps, and my legs were burning beneath me. I felt about ready to collapse. After all, I'd sprinted from my house to the hospital, then from my mom's room up to the roof. Barely a pause in between. Fucking, after her backstory, Yumiko just looks like Chun-Li for a few days. My exhaustion was the last thing on my mind. I threw myself against the door with the last of my momentum, swinging the door wide open. Alone in the dark, engulfed by the roar of the rainstorm, I screamed for my mother. It was coming down so hard now that the mist was rising from the bare concrete. Even seeing across the roof was a challenge. Naturally enough, given the weather, I couldn't make out any signs of human presence. Just so much of those words of white shadows stirred in the darkness. There was a human being, a woman dressed in the white clothes with patience standing in the rain. From her height, the length of her hair, I realized at once it was my mother. Splashed through the puddles to her side. She was staring blankly into the sky, battered with powerful rain, her entire body utterly soaked. I I grabbed my mother by the shoulder and shook her frantically, trying to catch her attention, but her eyes were fixed on the sky. She didn't so much as budge. It was obvious at a glance there was something terribly wrong. Halfway through the sentence, I noticed somebody lying on the ground on the very edge of my peripheral vision. It was flapping around in the wind. I had a feeling I'd seen it before. Not that long ago, in fact. The cover, Taste for Painting, the work of a well-known artist. Those headlines said in a restrained professional font. The magazine containing that article was lying on my mother's feet, at my mother's feet. Anne slipped off her shoulder and staggered backwards, barely with staying on my feet. Why had this happened? Why did everything have to fall apart just when we were finally starting to move forward? Why was my mother standing there soaking wet? Why did she have that blank expression on her face? Any question bubbled to the surface of my mind, none of them had answers. I just sat there suspended in my mind, stagnating until it putrefied into a pool of solid sludge. My mother fixed her lifeless eyes on me. I was startled. It was the first time for as long as I could remember that my mother had looked me straight in the face. That was without a doubt the worst possible way for the chain to be broken. There was no light in Mom's eyes. The words she spoke posed a question, but there was nothing like actual curiosity behind them. It was the voice of a machine. I wanted to desperately convince myself she was joking. But no matter how I tried, I couldn't make myself believe it. The evidence before my eyes was simply too powerful. Mom's face was paler than white, and at the center of her wide eyes there was two bottomless dark wells where pupils had been. Tiny dots of black seemed more vast, more profound than the black sky stretching out endlessly above us. I was standing at the edge of an abyss, and I was afraid. I felt as though I might fall into those pools of darkness and disappear. But I couldn't stop staring, couldn't avert my eyes from the thing that was trying to swallow me whole. After all, she was the only person left in the world who'd ever acknowledged my existence. Pulled after her, praying the words might pull her back from across the chasm that separated us. But it was too wide. My voice was too weak. I was too weak. I shrunk away just one step. My heels slid backwards across the wet earth. And then, for just a moment, I felt as though my body was floating. Disoriented by a sharp impact to my backside, I didn't realize I'd been pushed out of the way till I saw the doctor moving past me. As I sat stunned on the wet concrete, they took my vacant-eyed mother in their arms. They were carrying me off like an oversized doll away from me to some place I didn't know. Pushing myself off the ground, screaming, I ran towards her. I didn't make it 3 steps before another nurse caught me in her arms.
大丈夫よ、由美子さん。大丈夫だから。いや、どこに連れて行くの？やめて！ Rolling up from...
There it is.
Rising above the pattering of the black rain, a baleful roar filled the air. Crawling up from the depth of the earth, demolishing everything in its path. It sounded like a man's boulder rumbling relentlessly across the world, merged with the scene before my eyes, and graved itself violently onto my eyes. Tried to follow my eyes as they carried her away. I strangled out one final cry. In response, the world filled with intense light as though a dozen cameras had flashed at once. For a moment I was dazzled. And by the time my vision returned to normal, there was nothing left to see. No, in fact, nothing. On that otherwise empty roof, one waterlogged magazine remained. It was dissolving now, by now, paper melting away, ink blurring into illegibility. The memory of the truth. But my memory of the truth it contained wouldn't disappear so easily. My broken mother was gone. The doctor would smile and told me she would be leaving the hospital and was gone. I was absolutely alone. Crumbled where I stood. My knees hit the ground first, then my hands and my face. My concrete was pleasantly cold against my cheek. If I lay here long enough, it would melt away and disappear, just like that magazine. The ground was cold and my body was hot. I'd used up everything I had. I was empty and given up on the very idea of moving. Merciless rain continued to pour down on me, jet-like rain, even though it wasn't night. The vicious dark water pooled around me, sweeping up my body as if swallowing me whole. Sometimes I hate that this country has 4 seasons. Just when I'm finally starting to forget, an autumn wind reminds me of a whispered insult. Winter skies bring back cold and lonely memories, and in summer, when the sunny evening storms arrive, I'm torn apart with every clap of thunder. Again and again, until there's nothing left. 1 year after my mother's relapse, things had quieted down. The commotion at the hospital created a bit of a stir around town, and it didn't take long for the talk to trickle to a halt. For one thing, the main character in the story was no longer a resident. And even our cold-hearted country gossips seemed hesitant to turn a gravely ill woman's condition to one of their nasty little jokes. I was absent from school for a week after the incident, recovering from shock and a mild case of pneumonia, and my life eventually returned to its normal rhythm. That would be the superficial summary, at least. The trauma of reading that magazine article had led to a dramatic downturn in my mother's condition. She was now suffering from acute memory loss. A physician, my grandparents, my father, and me, we were all strangers to Mom now. Everyone she met slipped out of her mind within minutes. These symptoms were far beyond anything a local hospital was equipped to handle. Soon after the incident, Mom was transferred to a specialized psychiatric institution in North Kanto. Ironically enough, that divorce never actually came to pass. Perhaps my father backed off out of concern for his public image. That it was part of some conditional legal arrangement, I don't know. One thing, however, was perfectly clear. The connection between the Sakaki and Kawamoto houses had been severed. My two families spent the first months after the incidents squabbling by proxy about legal issues and the care of their mutual burdens. In the end, Sakaki continued to cover my mother's medical expenses, but they were no longer providing supplementary support to the Kawamoto family's floundering business.
美佐子の件だけは責任を取らせたけど、これで支援もなくなって。どうするつもりですか、あなた。
つつましくやっていけばなんとかなる。すまんが、しばらくは我慢をしてくれんか。
歴史のある川本の家がこんな粗末な生活をするようになるなんて。しかもあの子の面倒まで見なければいけないなど、こんなバカな話がありますか。
まったく、なぜこんなことになってしまったのかな。
Even long after the matter was settled, my grandparents never seemed to tire of moaning about the unfairness of it all. And of course, as the easiest targets for their bitterness, I once again found myself wedged between a rock and a hard place. I had the bare minimum required for a normal life. I always kept up appearances after all. But not a day went by when I didn't hear sarcastic, scornful words from the shadows. I went to a silent school and returned to a silent home. I'd lost my refuge, I'd lost my help. All I could do was suffer quietly. This would be the point where a normal person might go bad, but I had been living inside a cage for so long that not even that choice was available to me. There was a time just once when I tried approaching a group of girls with that sort of reputation. The result was pathetic. In that country town, even the delinquents were mindful of appearances. They turned their backs on me and walked away without a word, shunned even by the lowest of the totem pole. For a long moment, I just stood there, rooted to the spot, and I found myself looking up at the sky. No different from the day I'd gazed out of the window with my mother. Had Mom always been alone? So I should spend so much time watching something that never really changed. That I was well and truly isolated, I began to think more about her feelings.
泣くこともできないのね。
Seems like a moment's worthy of a little sobbing, but it just wasn't happening. On that day in the rain, I used up my lifetime's supply of tears. All that was left was a parched, withered husk of a human being. For one long year, I did nothing but watch the sky change slowly above me. But soon enough, I was pulled down into the muddy stream once again. Brother dead. A little before the start of summer vacation, our teacher had fallen ill that afternoon. The final lesson was replaced by a study hall which I'd spent gazing dully out the window. An exercise in pure boredom finally complete, I was walking sluggishly down the road towards my grandparents' house, just turning the final corner onto our street. Something was wrong about this picture. A shiny black luxury car was parked alongside the thickly hedged road in front of our house. The Kawamoto family didn't own a private automobile. My grandfather apparently had one back in the day when the business was doing well, but it was one of the first things to go when the recession hit. The negotiations with the Michiaki family had always been held in a business office by the station, so it was hard to imagine why such a car could have possibly come. For a little while, I dawdled outside, staring curiously at the car with its thickly tinted windows. But after 2-3 minutes, a voice called to me from inside our house.
遅かったじゃないの、由美子ちゃん。早く上がって。
I was startled. The friendly attitude was one thing, but it was the very first time that since I'd arrived that my grandmother had called me by my name. She wouldn't have done that without a very good reason. After quickly removing my shoes, I let her usher me into the parlor. It was the first time in a good 4 years that I had been in that room. The instant I crossed the threshold, 5 men in black suits stood up simultaneously and bowed in greeting. As I blinked bewildered, my grandmother spoke, a strange little smile twisting her face.
ほら、そこに座って。由美子ちゃんが話に入らないと進まないことなんだから。
With that, she sat me at the head of the table. The dusty air of the rarely used parlor tickling my nose, I looked around me. All 5 of the men had deeply serious expressions on their face. To be honest, I wanted nothing more than to run away.
一体何の話なんですか？こんな急に。
As soon as the question left my mouth, the man seated to my left took control of the conversation.
お父様、榊道明様の命により、由美子様をお迎えに上がりました。
お迎えに？
はい。お父様は昨年の一件で、由美子様をとても心配していらっしゃいました。それで、こうしてお迎えに上がった次第です。
What on earth was this man talking about? After the incident with Mom, my father hadn't showed up in this house even once. I understood that he had a busy professional life, but he didn't even bother to send a message or place a phone call. Now they expect me to believe he was worried? Now after a full year? Ridiculous. It was mystifying. Grandma even let them in the house, let alone with that simpering grin on her face. Did you understand this was nonsense? Soon I discovered that my grandmother's reactions were perfectly lucid, for reasons that had nothing to do with any of that.
よかったわね、由美子ちゃん。これでいい学校に通えるし、お父様とも一緒に住めるのよ。
いろいろあったが、これからは何の心配もしないで暮らせるんだ。よかったな。
お父様からもまたこの家を助けていただけるそうで、本当によかったわ。
I now understood. This was a question with no choices. My grandparents had decided the answer beforehand and were now unilaterally forcing me towards it. I was so profoundly astonished at their naked self-interest that I couldn't even manage any anger. But it's not as if snapping at them would have achieved anything in the first place. Remaining with them was probably never really an option. Well, Scott, if I was a Yumiko in this situation, I would take up Michiaki on the offer to be taken in by his family under one singular condition. The Kawamoto family is to never receive a singular cent of support from them ever again. Like, not only did they treat her constantly like a fucking burden that only made their lives worse, they barely even cared for her mother, which essentially just saw her as a fucking bargaining chip. Like, these people are incorrigible and they deserve to suffer.
Yeah.
Or alternatively, the other thing I would add is with regards to the school she went to. Sachi, I've got somewhere you can burn down again.
Yeah, that would be a very good thing to happen, actually. I'll crush the rest of the Doritos.
Oh.
Hold on, let me grab me hammer.
As ever, that does it. I'm getting my mallet.
There you go, this should be sufficiently pulverized. Yep. Carefully now. Be careful, be careful. I really need to remember this. Anyways. When I stood from my seat, my grandfather spoke in a sickening sweet voice.
あらあら、そこまで急がなくてもいいのよ。榊家の方は明日もまたいらっしゃ。
いえ、結構です。今いらっしゃってるのなら、その車に乗っていきます。
あら、そうなの？由美子ちゃんがそう言うのなら仕方ないわよね、あなた。
ああ、もちろんそうだ。由美子のいいようにすればいいからな。
I was about ready to vomit. From my grandmother's words, it seemed clear that Michiaki had come with a clear offer in hand. My return in exchange for restored financial support to Kokomoto business. My grandparents had considered me a burden from the start, so I imagine they didn't exactly hesitate. Probably felt like selling some piece of junk from the backyard for a huge sum at auction. I tried uttering the words, but I couldn't manage too much conviction. After all, I was scuttling around the same sordid ved. How could I complain? I wasn't working for my field. I pulled out my clothes out of my chest of drawers, threw them onto my tatami mat, and scowled down at them. I wasn't speaking to my grandparents, the house, or even my mother. It was a farewell to the person who had lived here, idly wasting day after empty day, accomplishing nothing but growing older. I spoke those words to confirm a simple fact. That room was nothing to me. It held nothing of me. One by one, I cut the clothes I'd worn in place to shreds. The expensive-looking children's clothes I brought with me, the generic, ready-made supermarket clothes my parents had bought me when the need arose, middle school uniform. My face and emotionless mask, I carefully chopped them into tiny pieces.
Right, remember at one point in the general part of the route whereby Makina made a caustic remark about Yumiko doing this beforehand? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I 100% see why she's doing it.
Yeah, but I imagine with Makina putting it out,
like a lot of these clothes are probably expensive children's clothes, so they would probably try to sell them for a quick buck the moment she's gone. Fucking deny him that. Grabbing scrapped clothes with both hands, I shoved them right back into my chest of drawers. Took less than a minute to toss my everyday belongings, my art supplies, and sketchbooks into my bag. Just like that, my life in that place was over. Didn't look back. After a stiff formulaic goodbye to my grandparents, I dropped by my school for a few brief formalities, then began the journey home. Of course, I hadn't seen that home in many years. I had only the vaguest memories of the house itself. I was sincerely happy to be leaving my grandparents behind, but that didn't make me any less concerned about the moonlight being thrust on me so abruptly. The car headed north at high speed, moving from the coastline into the outskirts of the metropolitan area. We're heading to the heart of West Tokyo. An elderly man who had introduced himself as the chief of clerical's department at my father's company was behind the wheel.
車が混んでいなければ、あと30分もすれば着くかと存じます。
Glancing briefly at his GPS screen, he answered my question and calmed down. 6 kilometers as the crow flies. That was the distance from my grandparents' house to that of my grandfather. In the end, my mother had never managed to return to a place less than an hour away by car. I myself was only coming back to someone else's power. At someone else's power. Didn't have the slightest idea what was coming next. Wasn't particularly helpful, but I didn't feel much in the way of despair either. Won't be enough if I could just spend my days quietly until I finally became an adult. With that thought, I closed my eyes and waited for the car to arrive at its destination.
Right, gents. I have unfortunately just noticed what time it was, and me being cursed with an early start, I am going to have to drop here.
Oh,
So,
no.
yeah.
I
So with
say
that
we
in
try
mind,
to finish the me and Bud will probably try to finish the flashback, and
okay, if you're
get it
sure.
ended.
Yeah, I'll catch up with some, so to speak, homework on the rest of it. Don't worry,
Yeah.
you'll survive it. I hope.
I mean,
I don't know.
thus far, yes, it is a bit depressing, but is it as depressing as any of the other routes? I would argue no. This is probably the least depressing one, I would say.
I feel differently.
I mean, all of them are depressing, but this is Grisaia,
Yeah,
of course they are.
Yeah, it has to be. Anything's better than the forest.
Yeah. We don't talk about the forest. We don't.
Anyway, take care, guys. I'll catch you next time.
See ya.
See ya, Eagle.
There goes Eagle. Time to finish the fucking flashback, I assume. Just as the chief secretary had told me, we reached my new home about 30 minutes later.
Okay.
The house was very different from the patchwork image I had sewn together from the fragments of my childhood memories. Far more magnificent than I remembered it. From the outside, the building itself looked like a Western-style mansion straight out of a manga. Spacious gardens were surrounded by a high wall. Grounds were covered in so many tall, beautiful trees that it could have been a park. I had hazy memories of those things, but after years in the country, their scale and magnificence took me by surprise. But on an emotional level, the sight left me cold. My father's actions were one thing, my obedient return at his whistle was another. No matter how splendid the house might have been, when I thought about the foundation it was built on, my thoughts naturally took a turn for the bitter. I whispered the words to myself too softly for the driver to taking my luggage from the trunk to hear. Passing through a finely wrought metal gate, I returned to the house I spent my first years in. The uninspiring luxury was all the more pronounced inside the house itself. As I took off my shoes and looked around the gleaming entrance hall, I heard footsteps approaching from the side passage.
Yumiko, 戻ったか。大きくなったな。
It probably would have taken me by some time to recognize the person standing in front of me, if not for the recent photographs I'd seen in a certain magazine 1 year before. Face to face with my father for the first time, what felt like decades, I saw a middle-aged man with a reasonably healthy complexion, but a subtle hint of something like gloom in his eyes. As I lowered my head to a polite bow, my father continued in the same cheerful tone.
どうした？声に元気がないじゃないか。車に長い時間乗ったから疲れたのか。
I was more taken aback than anything else, considering the way he had treated Mom and me up until that point. His aggressively friendly attitude was incomprehensible. From what I could remember, my father and I had only spoken a bare handful of times when I was a child. Certainly never like that. His motives weren't clear to me, but his sudden attempt at intimacy was off-putting. I didn't quite know how to respond to it.
大丈夫です。ちょっとお部屋に戻って休みます。
For a moment, I just wanted to cut off the nauseating conversation.
ああ、わかった。ユミコの好きなようにするといいよ。
失礼します。
With then I bowed to my father and made my way past him, heading to the one part of the house I remembered well. My very first place of refuge, the bedroom in which I had spent so many hours as a young child. I climbed the stairs and found my room without the slightest hesitation. Remembering its location so exactly prompted a brief swell of nostalgic emotion, but that soon gave way to that recurring sense of disgust. My memories there weren't exactly happy in their own right. The room I entered for the first time in years was so completely changed that I couldn't help raising my voice in surprise. The badly mismatched desk and bed had been cleared away, and in their place was a complete arrangement of fancy furniture and pretty little luxury items, exactly the sort of thing that might appeal to a girl of my age.
わざわざ揃えたのかしら。
Every part of the decor seemed as if it could have come straight from a set of a movie. The room was filled with fragile ephemeral things. It felt as though it had disappeared like soap bubbles if I actually touched them. Normally it would have made me happy, but at the moment it seemed like a hollow
お母
gesture.
さん、帰ってきたわよ。
Sitting on my bed, I murmured those words to myself. I finally managed to return to that house, but my mother wasn't with me. All I had there was a forced artificial welcome from the man who had broken her. Would I simply resume the same numb, miserable life in a different setting? Staring up at the ceiling, I could feel the familiar jet black sludge growing thick inside my chest. I fought down the crushing feeling of despair as best as I could. I closed my eyes and fell asleep. The next day, my father had arranged beforehand for my transfer into an all-girls school some 20 minutes from the mansion by car. It was a very prestigious institution. I'd actually recognize the name. I felt badly out of place, uncomfortable with my new uniform and the beautiful school building. I could hear the whispers from all sides. Entering the classroom, I sat quietly at an open desk as far from the others as possible. It was an improvement in one regard. The talk about me wasn't particularly cruel or hostile. But essentially, I was treated just like before. My classmates interacted with me in a business-like way then. When necessary and otherwise, largely pretended I wasn't there. A school full of young ladies from upper-crust families was surprisingly uncomfortable in its own way. Having completed my formulaic introduction and the first day of classes, I found myself instinctively heading for the rooftop. After gazing up for a moment, I settled down against the concrete support near the edge of the roof and took out my sketchbook. I began to draw the sky above me. A simple pencil hatching, rendering the clouds and the sky in shades of grey. That afternoon I couldn't stand to look at the world. Anything my eyes settled on repulsed me. That empty sky was the only thing I could bring myself to observe calmly. The driver held open the door in front of the house for me. I was delivered to school and back. Didn't even have to open my own door anymore. That extreme courtesy only intensified my discomfort. Household employees greeted me with a smile so soft and mild it was slightly nauseating. When I answered with a brief nod, they began to bombard me with words of rapid succession. Their tone eager and openly professional.
Yumiko-sama, 何か召し上がりますか? いえ、結構です。部屋へ戻ります。では、何かお飲み物をお持ちしましょうか? それも結構です。喉は渇いておりませんから。
それでは、何かありましたらお申し付けください。
はい。
Climbing slowly up the stairs, I heaved a heavy sigh. Would I be putting in that sort of show every single day from now on? The deference was so transparently artificial that it was rather painful than flattering. Hachi. Given my current position, was just might be possible to order them to stop acting like that. But I didn't know what repercussions that would have, especially if they were to report it to my father, and ended up deciding it best not to make waves at such an early stage. I've been able to postpone it for one day with excuses about my fatigue, but the time has come.
久しぶりだね。こうして由美子と食事をとるのは。
A glass of wine in one hand, my father turned a radiant smile on me. Inside my head, I spat out the words, "It's the first time." For a moment, I sat down for that luxurious dinner, and my beaming father was immediately filled with desperate longing to flee. Tried a little of the sautéed duck on my plate just to kill a few seconds, but it seemed strangely tasteless and without texture.
学園の先生から褒められたよ。転入する際の成績が抜群だったとね。これなら学校間のレベル差はほとんど関係ないとのことだった。
My father, still maintaining the same cheerful tone as it had before, complimented me at great length. All I could manage was to nod and mechanically shovel the food placed in front of me into my mouth. Course after course, I couldn't taste a thing. I didn't even put any salt on these. It was like eating hunks of rubber. Carrying things to my mouth solely for the sake of chewing on them didn't make for a pleasant dining experience. Gradually began to ignore my plate in favor of frequent sips of water. Tasteless food, Dad's barrage of praise, and myself sitting here passively just accepting it all. Thinking about the scene made me sick. My emotions only grew darker with every passing minute. It was all some bizarre whim of my father's. dead or meaning the ceremony was carrying out in pursuit of some hidden objective. What else could it possibly be?
ユミコ、髪はずっと伸ばしているのか？
Felt my breath catch in my throat. That summer day, the day when the heat had poured down on me like a rain of molten iron. The moment when I had clawed at my chest and hacked at my own hair and in a spasm of self-loathing, it all came flooding vividly back.
はい。
I must told him that I'd cut it short once. But what would be the point of explaining that to this man? Would only throw this little play into chaos. What on earth did my father mean by asking me a question like that? Bringing up the very thing that had always marked me as worthless.
そうか。とてもよく似合ってるよ。
My father, a smile on his face, spoke those words in a casual tone of voice.
ユミコ。
すみません。
Rising from my seat, I ran out of the room, both hands pressed tightly across my mouth.
おい、何か体に合わないものがあったんじゃないのか？
I could hear my father snarling at someone behind me, but I didn't have time to be worrying about that. I would appreciate if you could stop making noises like that while I'm eating cheese, Yumiko. Seriously, have some manners. As it burned my mouth, I vomited the tasteless food out of the toilet bowl. None of it had the slightest flavor going down, but coming up, yeah, back up it was powerfully unpleasant. Sounded a bit unfair somehow.
何を勝手なこと。
Wasn't my sex the entire reason he'd cast Mom aside? What on earth was my father thinking? How could he say that? Why? Never even looked at me before. This had to be some kind of whim. He decided to play house for a while to appease my guilty conscience. Either that or he needed to do so for some work-related reason. How long would it take before I could find a safe haven? It was no better than living with my grandparents. And the countryside, at least, I wasn't expected to do anything. There weren't expectations of me here. There were expectations of me here. That made it even more agonizing. Tasting the acid rising once more from the depth of my throat, I descended into self-pity. I would truly have preferred to shut myself in a dark shed, to reject the world and do nothing at all for the rest of my life. But so long as I needed food to eat and a bed to sleep in, I had no choice but to play along with my father's momentary kindness. The thought triggered a new wave of nausea. One week passed. People often say that time flies when we're having fun. Perhaps it's true, because those first 7 days seemed to last a century. Having my bag next to my desk, I pulled out my notes and textbooks. I was as isolated and out of place as ever in my new school. I'd been studying a good deal, but it was simply my way of killing the vast stretches of otherwise painfully empty time I'd spent there. It certainly had absolutely nothing to do with my father's praise. I hadn't sketched for a few days now. For one thing, the weather had been dull and grey, so I couldn't look up without remembering that day, and I just hadn't been in the mood in the first place. Even if I opened my sketchbook today, I'd only end up with another drawing of the sky, as if I didn't have enough of those already. Those vaguely self-mocking thoughts stopped me on the way up to the roof, redirecting my path down to the low floor. My life was a steady line from one meaningless moment to the next. Identical days trickled by, but there was one thing that had begun to change in the course of that week. Human beings are frightening and adaptable creatures. to me with my father that had at first repulsed me to the point of vomiting were gradually growing tolerable. Sometimes I hated myself for that. But little by little I was coming to the understanding that it wasn't just a result of my mind acclimating itself to the situation.
ユミコ、学校には慣れたか？
はい。
いきなりの転校で戸惑ったかもしれんが、すぐに友達もできる。お父さんの時もだな。
My father was making genuine effort. With gentle advice and anecdotes about his own experience, he tried to reassure me. Apparently Dad had gone through many transfers in his student days and was struggled with how to present himself to his new classmates. It's been to learn a number of surprisingly personal things about my father as he persistently tried to draw me into conversation.
ああ、そうか。今は時代も違うだろうからな。すまなかったな、ユミコ。
いいえ。
And he wasn't pushy or arrogant about it. He seemed to be considering my point of view. Just as I had heard, Dad was on an extremely tight schedule. Even when he returned home, it was extremely rare for him to stay overnight. More frequently, he would return to his company immediately after dinner. But that also meant he was coming home solely to share a meal with me. He gradually grew less prickly and slightly more communicative. But now I could eat dinner with him without a... By now I could eat dinner with him without a hint of queasiness.
ん？どうしたユミコ？
いえ、なんでも。
Just as something was about to spill out of my mouth, Mom's pale and empty face had flashed before my eyes. I suddenly reminded myself, this man was responsible for my mother's suffering. That fundamental resentments hadn't faded. I wouldn't let it fade. Lying in bed in my darkened room, I thought things over. I was no less uncertain than when I first arrived at that place. But the reason for that inner turmoil were beginning to change. My father's attitude towards me was becoming harder to process. First, I'd simply been disgusted by his old familiarity. By that point, it was harder to dismiss us as some bizarre game. Sometimes I could almost take his friendliness at face value. Even that remark about my hair might have been intended as nothing more than a casual compliment. Such positive interpretations were beginning to seem plausible.
そんなの今更よ。
I tried mumbling native words to myself, but the nagging doubts remained. My distant mother had grown kind when her condition improved. The situation was clearly different, but there was always the possibility that my father had undergone a similar change in the years since I'd seen him last. Tossing and turning in my bed, I turned the question over in my mind. It's been so cold for so long. Little by little, I could feel something like warmth returning to my body. Just ended up being potato again. This time will be different. With two opposing answers battling indecisive in my mind, I waited for dawn to come. Two months after my return to Tokyo, my life was beginning to change even outside of the house. School didn't seem particularly unpleasant anymore. It wasn't so difficult being alone in the first place once I got used to it. As long as I quietly attended my classes, the entire day would pass easily enough. I never disliked studying, so once my mood took a turn for the better, it didn't feel like wasted time. The change in the season had brought me more periods of clear weather. I resumed my habit of drawing on a daily basis. As my mind grew calm, my art slowly began to change as well. My perspective, pointed straight up for so long, began to creep downward. Every once in a while I'd include a townscape or two among my sketches. It wasn't exactly principle of me to be finding enjoyment in that life, but there was no point sulking forever. My sardonic feelings of self-reproach slowly faded. I began to look at the world around me more calmly.
お帰りなさいませ。
ただいま。
Even those brutally awkward interactions with the household employees had gotten more tolerable with the passage of time. After 2 weeks, they had picked up on my non-reactions and began to tone down their aggressive approach. They would generously back off after letting me know they were available if I needed them. That arrangement was much more comfortable for me. By then, I actually was asking them for something every once in a while.
今日は部屋へすぐ戻られますか？ええ、そのようにします。かしこまりました。
After asking the maid to have someone call me when it was time for dinner, I returned to my room. Sitting down in front of my desk, I thought back over the last few months. My attitude towards that new life were beginning to soften in many ways. With one exception, I was stubbornly continuing to keep my father at arm's length. His behavior had changed. He continued to treat me kindly all the while. Nonetheless, I offered him nothing but brief monosyllabic answers, vaguely avoiding his questions. That seemed only natural at first. What else could you expect after how he treated my mother? After abandoning me for years, the resentment seemed to justify my behavior. Well, yeah, it does. Let's be honest with ourselves here. But months passed, and I just couldn't see any signs of the cruel man I thought he was. At least nobody was interacting with me. Nearly every night I rejected his gentle attempts to draw me into conversation. My father didn't seem to be letting that bother him, but I was beginning to feel increasingly guilty about my attitude. I threw the question at my ceiling, knowing all too well that no answer would be found forthcoming. It would be time for dinner soon. For a very different reason than before, I started to find that time somewhat painful.
今日も由美子の話題が出てな。榊さんのお嬢さんは可愛くて聡明でいらっしゃると目黒医大の先生もおっしゃってたよ。
はい。
由美子がこんなにいい子に育って父さんも嬉しいよ。本当に。
This man interacted with me as something close to an ideal father for 2 straight months. That day, as always, all that came out of his mouth were words of praise and concern for me. These feelings smoldered away quietly inside my chest.
なあ、由美子。
My father spoke to me in a kind tone of voice. Couldn't endure his gaze. I found myself hanging my head.
Yumiko.
Didn't dislike being praised, not at all. It was making time in an extremely busy life for me. I wasn't yet cynical enough to dismiss that. Sometimes I felt myself on the verge of being grateful. But no, not yet. That black grime was still inside me. There was always that other emotion struggling against my guilt. So long as that remained, I would never allow myself to get any closer to my father.
母さんのことか。
I felt myself twitch with surprise. Until that point, I deliberately steered clear of that particular topic. I assumed my father was intentionally avoiding it as well, so the turn of the conversation came as a real shock.
話して良いものかずっと迷っていたが、ちゃんと話さないと由美子も納得してはくれないということなんだろうな。
そんな、私は。
いいんだ。これは父さんが悪かったんだ。
My father slowly began to speak. He spoke about his feelings towards my mother, how it felt like she left, how it felt when she left, and behind everything, the constant stress of increasingly demanding job placed on their marriage. Brother, that's still no fucking excuse to send your wife into fucking mental illness. Everything my father told me turned my image of him completely on its head.
二人が出て行った時、本当に辛かったよ。連れ戻しに行こうって何度も思った。でも仕事に追われてそれができなかった。
In time, my increasingly insulated father began to seek comfort. He admitted that the affair described in the magazine article had happened at that time.
父さんも寂しかったんだ。会社でもいろいろとあって、いけないことと知りつつも、母さんを裏切るようなことをしてしまった。
You know, all of these arguments could work. Could work. If the fucking divorce lawyers hadn't shown up at the goddamn hospital. Like, that itself should tell Yumiko he's bullshitting. He is just laying on empty platitudes to win her over for some reason. Because the moment he sent divorce lawyers to a hospital to divorce his mentally ill wife, it was obvious that he doesn't fucking care about him. Like, in no universe can someone do that without knowing that there is a clear risk of causing the fucking condition to worsen exponentially.
雑誌に記事が出たと聞いたとき、一番に考えたのは母さんを巻き込んではいけないということだったんだ。それで弁護士を向かわせたんだが。
Yeah, called bullshit. If that was the reason, they would have had no reason to restrain Yumiko. They could have just said, sorry. Should explain the affair happened. Divorce is not. But instead, they fucking restrained her and tried to charge in on her mother's room. It was consistent. The actions that had seemed so inhumanely cruel at the time could also be explained by my father's story. After all, that lawyer never got the chance to speak with my mother. There was no proof he'd been sent to serve her the divorce papers. But even so...
Yumiko.
My father looked straight in my face from across the table. Couldn't help myself. I returned his gaze. At some point, I'd forgotten even to avert my eyes.
お父さんを許してくれないか?
It was a gentle voice. Begun to think I would never hear a voice like that ever again from anyone. And yet what's coming from him to me from him was acceptance in a way I'd always wanted most. Many thoughts flooded through my head in a confused jumble. Those words were more than powerful enough. My fragile defense wall had finally struck a leak.
Yumiko.
ごめんなさい、お父さん。ちょっと、私。
I stood from a chair, turned away from that concerned face, and hurried out of the hallway. The hallway halfway covering my face with my right hand, I stumbled up the stairs as best as I could. On the way up, I caught a glimpse of a servant staring at me in shock, but I wasn't close enough to pay that any mind. The world was growing hazy before I even reached my floor. It's Babi Yumiko. The instant I closed... I was about to read and then I took a look at the actual CG and all I can think is why is Yumiko playing Saya, cosplaying Saya from Sayonara? Do I have to explain? Do I have to send a picture of Saya from Sayonara?
Sure, go ahead.
Pretty damn fucking close, no?
Yeah, actually. Kinda.
Don't trust her, by the way.
I'm a very trusting person.
Don't trust her.
If you say so.
There's a reason why some people describe her as the meat hoe. All I'm saying is look at the background. The world was growing hazy before I even reached my floor. The tears came pouring down my face. One drop stained the ivory carpet beneath my feet, then another. It was hard to understand. I couldn't reconcile the man with the vicious, vulgar person magazines described. Couldn't believe he had spoken those words for show. Sounded as if they'd come from the heart. Just as Mom had come to regret the cruel things she said to me, perhaps Dad was simply trying to make up for his mistakes. Looking at it from that angle, it wouldn't be so hard to accept his apology. I had one photograph of my mother left, safe in the memory of my mobile phone. As always, her face was turned to the side. Couldn't read her expression. My life had been shades of grey for so very long. Little by little I could see colours beginning to emerge. It was a pleasant feeling. The air was still a little cold, but the sky that day was remarkably beautiful. Put down my brush, I stretched out and muttered a few words to no one in
今日
particular.
はこのぐらいにしておこうかしら。
Recently, I've been getting so absorbed in my art that it was easy to forget the time. There have been a few incidents where I kept my car waiting long enough to cause some anxiety, so I started making a conscious effort to check my watch frequently. I examined my sketchbook. Instead of the sky I had been devoted to for so long, today I painted the rooftop flower
こん
bed.
なのが描けるようになったのね。
After months of obsessively sketching the clouds, the change had taken me by surprise. For a while, I just gazed at that image, various emotions running
いけ
through
ない
me.
時間。
I hurriedly gathered up my painting material and pushed them into my bag. As it turned out, it was a little slow coming home after all. Life changed rapidly after my father's apology. Dinners together that had once been so painful were now something I looked forward to. I talked to him about many things. My art, formerly sketched to the sky in black pencil, had become increasingly colorful work executed with paintbrushes. Even my life at school was shifting ever so slightly for the better.
榊さん、今ちょっといいかしら。
飯田さん、いいわよ。
A girl who stood out even among the young ladies in our class, Ida Kanako, had begun to approach me on a regular basis.
ここがちょっとわからないんだけど、教えていただけるかしら。
古文の現代語訳ね。確かにここは難しいわ。ちょっと待ってて。
Struck up a conversation about our work in art class one day and had been talking about like this pretty frequently ever since. She wasn't quite a friend yet, but up until then, I'd almost never had actual conversations in school with anyone but the teachers. By my standards, it was an enormous step forward.
ありがとう。榊さんの説明には無駄がなくていいわ。
そんな、私はただ普通に話しているだけよ。
そんなことないわよ。先生とか向いてるかもね。
Perfectly normal, unremarkable little scene. But in comparison to the emptiness of my life before then, those moments made every day feel astonishingly fresh and new.
お父さん、お帰りなさい。
ああ、ただいま、ユミコ。
Dad was still an incredibly busy man. Nonetheless, he would always come home at least a few times every week to have dinner with me. I used to only see his face during the meal itself, but recently I started greeting him at the door with a natural smile on my face.
今日はね、飯田さんとずっとお話ししていて。
おお、前に言っていた友達のことだね。
まだ友達とかじゃないんだけど。
Previously, my father talked and talked while I offered only brief responses, but the situation was largely reversed. I told Dad about everything, every trivial little thing in my life. No matter what the topic, he never failed to hear me out with a smile that made me happy.
なあ、ユミコ。
どうしたの、お父さん。
美佐子が治ったら、3人で海外旅行にでも行くか。
Alright, motherfucker, promise something you know won't happen.
Eh?
忙しくてそういうことをしてあげられなかったからな。それとも何か別のことがいいか？
私、遊園地がいいな。
遊園地？そんなのいつだって行けるだろう。
そこがいいの。
My father looked mystified. Still, I stuck to my guns. When I was very small and very lonely, the idea of a family visit to an amusement park had enchanted me. I was well past the age to be begging for a trip like that, but that secret yearning had never really gone away.
そうか。わかった。父さんの会社の系列にも遊園地はあるからな。
そんなのじゃなくていい。普通にでいいから。
ユミコはいつも控えめだな。よし。じゃあ美佐子が母さんが治ったら3人で遊園地に行くか。
Dad spoke those words with a smile. It was the first time I'd asked him for anything. As my days became happy, I'd been careful not to say anything greedy. Anything about the things I wanted. I suppose I couldn't believe that tranquil life was real. If I asked too much of the dream, I was afraid I might just fall apart underneath me. Ever since that day, the size of my diary entries had increased exponentially. I used to write nothing happened again and again, ripping off the bottom of the page for scrap paper. Now I was often running out of space before I could cover everything. In the center of my room, a canvas stood on an easel, surrounded by a colorful array of art supplies. All things I'd purchased and used frequently. Something happened again, but it'll fall apart at the blink of an eye. It was so peaceful that at times it made me uneasy. Come to think of it, those few days before my mother was scheduled to leave the hospital, I felt very much the same. Hope this lasts forever. Quite sure I just scribbled those words at the end of my diary entry. It was the one small wish I would allow myself. Let's watch that wish get fucking crushed, why don't we? The rainy season had come and gone. Summer was fast approaching. It was a day like any other. Reading on an internet that the weather would be taking a turn for the worse in the afternoon, I called off my usual rooftop painting session and went home a little early.
いいんですか? まだ少し歩きますが。
今日はちょっと歩きたい気分なので。
It said it would be raining in the evening, but for the moment it was a pleasant afternoon and well suited to a bit of light exercise. Therefore I got out of the car halfway and walked the remaining kilometer or so home. There wasn't any real reason for that. It was just a whim. When I opened the front door and slipped inside, I found the entrance hall empty of the servants who were usually there to greet me. It was probably because I'd returned so suddenly. Even when I closed the door behind me, the hallway remained silent. Not that it really bothered me either way. I began to move towards the stairs.
ですので、そちらについても由美子様に気づかれないようにしています。
But a voice from deep in the hallway stopped me in my tracks. If that woman hadn't happened to speak my name at that very moment, without a doubt I would have shrugged and gone up the stairs to my room and stayed completely oblivious. Slowly inched my way down the passage and careful not to make a sound and stopped just before the corner. From the other side I could hear the 3 employees who usually met me at the door talking about something.
今のところ問題なく進んでいるようだな。
はい、由美子様もすっかり旦那様に懐いているようです。
そうか。ならばいい。旦那様からは引き続き動向に注意しろと言われている。
わかりました。
I was speaking quietly, but I could make out their conversation clearly enough. Shouldn't be listening to this. Throbbing heart was making that very clear. My feet wouldn't budge and my ears were intent on capturing every word of their discussion.
しかし、こういう逆転劇もあるのね。びっくりしちゃった。
後継ぎの息子が急逝したから、子供の中で一番成績のいい操りやすそうなあの子を引っ張ってくるとか、わかりやすいわよね、旦那様も。
あの愛人、息子の亡くなった当日に出てったみたいよ。
そりゃ居場所なくしちゃうわよね。
Body had begun to tremble. It was a part of the story I'd almost pushed out of my mind by now. Had mistress and a boy she'd supposedly given birth to. I always thought it was strange. I'd always thought it was strange. I'd heard Dad called for me when he did. Why had Dad called for me when he did? Why suddenly approach a daughter he tossed aside once before?
旦那様もやることが徹底してるわよね。興信所使ってまであの子の情報を仕入れてさ、さも自分がちゃんと見ていたかのような取り繕い方して。
I thought that attention was his way of atoning for my mother's suffering.
今まで全然興味すらなかったのにね。そういうふりしなきゃあの子に取り入れないから必死なのよ。
一種の洗脳プログラムよね、あれ。最初はぎこちなく接するふりして、その後確信をついて打ち解ける。専門家まで呼んで策を練ったそうね。
thought it was his attempt at finally becoming a
そ
father
れ
to me.
にあっさりと騙されるお嬢様か。
No, I simply convinced myself it had to be this way. Deep down, I knew all along that it couldn't possibly have been true.
おい、やめないか。そろそろそのお嬢様の戻られる時間だ。
はいはい。ちょっと前までどうでもいい存在だったのに、道具として利用価値が出た瞬間にこれだもの。すごい世界よね。
で、またどっかで男の子が生まれた瞬間、一気にお払い箱になると。
そっか、その手がまだあったか。
見てみたいわよね。その表変する瞬間。
おい、いい加減にしないか。
はいはい。
Without language response, the group dispersed. Even long after the footsteps faded away, I stood there in silence, perfectly still. An idle question occurred to me. What sort of expression do I have on my face right now? What sort of expression do people make at times like these? Felt utterly detached from reality, still watching a movie projected before my eyes by some hidden camera. Eventually took one step and another, dragged myself into stairs and legs that didn't feel like my own. They said it would be raining on the evening, but the afternoon was pleasant. Well suited to be to a bit of light exercise. Therefore I got out of the car halfway and walked the remaining kilometre or so home. There wasn't any real reason for that. There wasn't any reason at all. And so I could only curse God. I reached my room. It was far too quiet inside. I'd almost begun to forget how painful the absence of sound could be. I'd almost begun to find the silence comfortable.
よし、じゃあ美佐子が母さんが治ったら3人で遊園地に行くか。
I wish the music would stop. I don't like this music. It reminds me of Forest.
After all, what is family for? Not to stab you in the back.
Scraps of notebook paper danced around me. Fragments of the word dad, fragments of the word happy, fragments of sentences highlighted in bright colors. Months and months of my life scattered through the air. The upper half of my painting was thick with dabs of blue and yellow paint. I was the first part to go. With harsh rips, the cloth tore away from one of the screws holding it in place. And as the canvas curled in on itself, the white paint flew to the ground with a dusting of snow. In the lightless room, white, blue, and yellow flew around. Scattered and torn, powerless and broken, they melted one by one into the darkness. I never think I'd an act I endured the night. The time came for me to wake up. Acting on pure reflexive habit, I stood up on steady feet and made my preparations. Particularly enough, there was still a part of me holding on to hope. House was no longer a refuge, but I'd begun to make a small place for myself at school. I could just make more friends, find people to talk to. Maybe that would be enough. Maybe that would be something.
Ida-san!
I caught a glimpse of the face I was looking for from the hallway. Ida might be willing. If I kept talking to her little by little, she might become my friend.
ですって。それで
Ida seemed to be talking to somebody. Peered in through the window. She was sitting at the very center of a group of girls. I'd just have to talk to her when she was alone.
榊さんって愛人の子なんだって。お父様が
Child of a mistress. Those were the same hateful words they'd printed on magazine that changed everything.
まだちょっとあの子に優しくしておこうかと思うの。
どうしてそんなことするの？そんな子だったらなおさら無視しておけば。
だってそうしたらもっと興味深い話が聞けるかもしれないじゃない。どうやって榊の家に母親が取り入ったのかとか。それでね。
For some reason I thought of fruit hanging from a tree. At first, it ripens and swells at the end of its branch, beautiful and tempting. But in time, the coloration grows impure and attractive. Its point of connection to the tree begins to creak from the strain. One thread of fiber snaps, then another. The thin line holding it to life and nourishment grows thinner and thinner. Finally, this moment, I heard something fall. I entered the classroom. The girls who had been snickering about me until a moment before innocently looked away and moved on to another topic of conversation. A few moments after dropping my bag by my desk, I slowly began to walk in their direction. I felt every movement of my feet with a brilliant, eerie clarity. This might be what it's like to take the last few steps towards the summit of a high mountain. Climber as the thrill of achieving something, but in the determination, the clear-minded acceptance of fate, there might be something similar. So I thought, a spectator to my own actions.
榊さん、何のご用かしら?
Ida Kanako turned to face me with her usual placid smile. I had already decided what would happen next. Familiar feeling swelled inside me, same as when I'd cut my hair, my diary, my
どう
canvas.
したの、榊さん。お顔の色がよろしくないわ。先生に。
Ida Kanako's hand reached out to me, and to my eyes it looked like the grasping claw of a corpse pulling me down into hell. I understood all along, simply kept myself from noticing. There was never any place of refuge here. I forced myself to believe in lies because I couldn't keep going without him. But I'd finally found another way to live. I watched serenely as the blood splurted out. For a moment she couldn't even process what had happened. For just a moment she stared down blankly at her hand, at a palm dyed in red. Ida Kanako collapsed in slow motion. Desks clattered all around. The others backed away as if distancing themselves from a live bomb.
榊さん、あなた一体何してるの？先生、誰か呼んできて、先生を。
That's right. I should have cut it all apart. I should have just shut off my brain and cut my way to freedom. I was grinding my teeth as hard as I could. There were tears streaming down my face. But all things considered, I didn't feel particularly sad. Much the opposite, since the blade had finally severed me from the lies, I was filled with a strange sense of relief. It felt as though a wide, shining road forward had been revealed to me.
こうなるのよね。
Shouldn't have hoped for a happy ending in the first place. Everything was scripted from the very start. And the actress had passively accepted a role, dreaming of a heartwarming conclusion into the black comedy that had been written for her. Oh, Jesus Christ. I think the cray-cray be happening. At some point I began to laugh. Tears were still rolling down my cheeks, but there was no sadness in me anymore. I left most of that behind on the day my mother broke. For the rest of the day my father betrayed me. And the rest of the day my father betrayed me. I depleted my stock of sorrow. Just how much of a clown do I need to be? Just how pathetic do I need to become? What do I need to do to satisfy my cowering audience? Please the God who wrote this play. Their eyes watched me from what felt like an enormous distance, pushing me slower and lower into the dark. I branched the open box cutter in my right hand towards the back of the classroom. And hearing little shrieks from my classmates were the only response. A few girls had already broken down. I laughed in their place, even when the teachers who came running pinned me down, even when they carried me out of the classroom like some sort of terrorist. Wouldn't it be odder not to laugh at something so utterly ridiculous? When they took me away, I noticed my desk standing isolated in the chaos, and felt a twinge of pity at leaving it behind. At the very end, I could never see the person who supposedly sat there. My father acted swiftly once he was notified. A settlement was reached with the Ida family. The incident was erased without so much as a disciplinary hearing. At first, my father tried to coax me out of my locked room with gentle words, but I refused to acknowledge his existence. After more than a month of that siege, I was half forced out, loaded unceremoniously into a car, and brought to a town where the air smelled of salt water. I understood what sort of a place it was the moment I saw the high wall surrounding it. It was a housing facility, pleasant little cage where I could be safely stowed away without the risk of causing further trouble. Owen, who introduced herself as a principal, introduced me to the school with a slightly fearful expression on her face. She brought me to an empty dormitory and told me it would be my new home. When I checked the bank book I'd been handed on the way over, I found a rather excessive amount of pocket money in my account. From the day I began to wear an exceptionally flashy uniform, school uniform, and commute to Mihama Academy, I haven't been face to face with my father even once. Personality starts off as something like a cube. Why is the textbook so high? Hold on, quick save, quick load. Yes.
I think it did this last time as well.
Yeah, I think it did. So save. Title. Continue. There we go. The question is just: is this the end? This is probably the end of the flashback. This feels like the end of the flashback. So I suppose that means that we'll be ending the part for today. And next week I have a fucking week off, so nice. Anyways, hope you guys, hold on. I still have not turned the webcam back on, actually, hold on. Hope you guys enjoyed this one, and see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.